The day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper bought a plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. He hijacked the plane, claiming he had a bomb in his briefcase, and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped out of the plane with the money and the bomb somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI claims to have investigated over 1,000 people, including dozens of deathbed confessions. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI suspended its investigation of the case. While the FBI is no longer looking for DB Cooper, there is a community of people who are trying to solve the case on their own. Welcome to the Cooper Vortex. In this episode, we're lucky to be joined by a man of faith that became a touring rock star, then became a scientist, a managing editor of a magazine, and businessman. Currently the office manager for a business consultancy working mainly in medical R&D. When he isn't working on the cure for what ails you, he's spending time with his partner Helen and their 2 sons, one of which has a unique heart transplant. Enjoy this episode with my good friend, Tim Wallace. Tim, when was the first time you heard about DB Cooper?
I vividly remember a documentary, obviously being in the UK. And at the time, we only had 4 channels. Maybe we had channel 5, but I think it was just the 4 channels. And I remember a documentary, and I don't know whether it was a UK specific one or not, but the reason that I think it wasn't was because I remember McCoy. So I assume that was the the Unsolved Mysteries? That's the one where they did the episode, and then I think there was like a second one that sort of said McCoy was involved, his name was brought up. But I vividly remember, watching it as a child and remember the sort of the reenactment of a guy sitting at the back with his sunglasses on and the suitcase. I remember that, and I just remember McCoy. So I think, like a lot of people of my age, I think it was probably Unsolved Mysteries. But I was quite surprised that sort of made it across the pond, but it did.
And when was the first time you really became interested in DB Cooper?
Probably just before COVID, I think. Everybody's world changed in COVID. My family especially, because I have an immunosuppressed child with a heart transplant, and the world was essentially closed in lockdown, and that was even more for us, because obviously COVID is dangerous for everybody. All those people who believe in COVID is dangerous, but more specifically for my son, with having no immune system. My life during my youth was very much rock and roll. I went to college, and then I wanted to go. I just got into music, and I just wanted to play guitar. So my whole sort of teens was, nightclubs and guitar and going on tour and recording albums or EPs and stuff, and then family and playing live, and that came up until quite recently. And then I had a family, and it just becomes a very difficult thing to do. And then obviously COVID kicked in, and it was kind of, I've always been into mysteries. My mum would read detective books when I was, she's always read that kind of thing, mystery novels and things. So I've always been interested in mysteries and watching, Expedition X and all that stuff. But the ones that were back in the sort of, probably really got into the mystery sort of world about 10 years ago, and Cooper probably 5 years ago. And then sort of COVID came in, and everybody had a lot of time on their hands.
Definitely.
I think I joined the mystery group probably about 6 months before Milton Vordal came out. So that's probably going back 2 or 3, maybe 3.5 years. Maybe it was slightly before that. But yeah, but seriously, I was intrigued by Milton, and then I got onto another. Well, I actually had a bit of a Forrest Fenn period.
Forrest Fenn as Cooper?
Yeah, just for, I need, yeah, a guy called Alan, I think his name was Alan, sent me the book.
I know Alan.
You know Alan, yeah. The Forrest Fenn community is a very sort of tight knit community, and I sort of dipped my toe in it, and there were some convincing things about him. But ultimately, like we've spoken to before, I take each suspect as a jigsaw, and you put the pieces in, and then it gets to the stage where I have to say, I, well, I mean, like you can't say that there not one suspect you can't 100% say isn't Cooper. There isn't really anyone. I mean, we laugh and joke about Wrecker. I mean, McCoy, I think everyone starts with McCoy, don't they, really? Because he was the first sort of big name. He'd done it, he did it again. But then when you get into the case, the two hijackings are pretty different. And but yeah, I went through a Forrest Fenn period, and then I spent a bit more time, and then I got into William J. Smith, and I would say he was my first serious suspect. Yeah, when I was in the mystery group.
And what attracted you to William J. Smith as a suspect?
There was lots of, I mean, he was the right age. He did have um, aviation knowledge to a certain extent because of his work. He had map reading, which I thought was very interesting because obviously there's this whole issue with Cooper about sort of jumping into the wilderness. Well, not the wilderness in the sense of trees, but just into the unknown because he didn't really. There's no indication that Cooper kind of knew where he was going to land, roughly, I think. But you know, so that was interesting. The map reading. Then there was little things like Cooper is always described as having um, a a larger lip or a larger lower lip, and William J. Smith played the trumpet. So it was just little things like that. He had a slight underbite, which kind of also accentuated that. This is the problem with suspects. You look at every little piece of information that Cooper had, but there isn't there isn't that much. Turkey neck, it's basically turkey neck, lower lip, thin nose, apparently. But I posted about that on on my page a while ago. I think there's two different. I think there's two different types. The Caucasian male has two different types of nose, and I had a big debate about that because that's one of the things that kind of apparently goes against my latest suspect. So, but there was lots of things that were happening. I mean, there was obviously the Gunther connection. There was adverts in papers which tied in with Dan Leclerc. There was lots of things that kind of was too much of a coincidence. But as you learn in the vortex, there are a lot of coincidences, and you just have to live with them. And you know, yeah, I got to a stage where I was pretty convinced.
But you're not convinced of William J. Smith anymore?
No, I was contacted by, or there was contact from a member of his family, and she revealed information that immediately made me wipe that jigsaw off the table. Because I mean, I won't go into details, but it basically it made. I know, and I'm not dissing anyone who's still in the William J. Smith camp, but I have to go with my gut feelings, and the information that I received was like, it can't be him, it can't be Cooper.
Yeah, because he had a family member come out publicly that's adamant it's not
Mm,
William J.
yeah,
Smith.
that's probably the same person that I spoke to,
Yeah.
probably. I believe everyone. I trust everyone. It's just whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I mean, you could say she's lying. You could say she knows he was Cooper, so why would she say to you she will, but I believe everyone. I don't the information that I received made me not pretty certain, 100% certain he wasn't Cooper. But then again, like I say, if you're in the William J. Smith camp, then that's for you to find out and for you to decide. But I have to say he wasn't Cooper.
I think it's really telling. I brought this up in the last episode, but you talk about Milton Bordeaux's family. They're
Hmm.
approached, hey, we're gonna go public with this. Your dad might be DB Cooper thing.
Hmm.
What do you guys think? And their attitude is, well, it's plausible. It's not
Hmm.
out of the realm of possibility.
Mm.
Whereas you have a William J. Smith family member and a Vince Peterson family member that have both come out super public, like it was not our father, our relative. It
Mm.
wasn't. It
Mm.
wasn't them.
But then you have an attitude from some people that that's exactly, you see these people through history who turn out to be a mass murderer or a bank robber who was the last person you would ever think it was. That happens a lot. So I understand that attitude is Cooper could have been the last person you thought it was. And that would apply to someone like William J. Smith or Vince Peterson. He's the last person. And I understand that attitude because that has proved to be true through history. It's the guy who owned the little shop down the road turned out to be a major bank robber or. Um, Personally, I think in this case, because of a lot of the evidence that I've picked up on and read, I think Cooper was a criminal, and that makes me bring up one thing is I think you start the case thinking that I think Ryan said this. You start the case thinking that DB Cooper was Han Solo, but as you get into the case, you realize that he wasn't Han Solo. He was, I call him a lovable scumbag. And I think I said to you, we spoke off air. It hit me last week. There were kids on that plane. And you might think, well, there were no children on there, but Tina was a kid. Flo was a kid. Alice was a kid. And even the pilots were in their 30s. I'm 50. Those are kids. And those six people got that plane to the ground. And that's, and you invest yourselves in suspects. And Cooper was a criminal, whether he was an actual criminal or not, whether he actually robbed banks or that was a crime. But you start off thinking, oh, this is a fun case because no one got hurt. But after several years, I think everyone who's in the case understands that this was a crime. And William J. Smith was a lovely man. And as Ryan brings up many times, is what kind of man would wake up that morning and think, I'm going to bring a suitcase with a fake bomb or a real bomb? That's irrelevant. The fakeness or the realness of it is completely and utterly irrelevant. But walk onto a plane with a suitcase and say to people, to the stewardess, I'm hijacking the plane. I want $200,000 and blah, blah, blah. What man would wake up that morning and put his shoes on and do that? You really got to think about that, you
Oh,
know?
I definitely think about that. And one of the
Mm.
things that I really struggle with is his age. I've said
Mm.
this a million times, but if I told you about this crime and I said, guess how old the guy was,
Yeah,
you would say, I don't know, 24, 25.
absolutely.
You wouldn't
Yeah.
go 40 to 50.
But I think that narrows down the suspects. I really do. I think that it puts them in it gives them a certain military angle. And that's a bit of a weird way of putting it, but it puts them in a time frame, you know. I mean, I start, I've gone through I've gone through Cooper knew nothing about parachutes to Cooper knew everything about parachutes, um, I, through what I've read. And, you know, I'm now a believer that Cooper knew about parachutes. And that kind of makes you think, well, there must be a military aspect to it. And then you look at his age and you think, what battle was he in? What war was what was he involved in to have military knowledge? But then I suppose you could say he was but most of the men in that period in America, probably of that age, would have been involved in some kind of military something. Do you know what I mean? Most
Oh,
of them.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
Statistically,
yeah,
I don't have
mm,
the number
yeah,
available to me, but I would bet
yeah.
in 1971, men between, let's go 35 to 55, I
Hmm.
would say seriously like 75% of them had served in the military.
Yeah,
An
yeah,
insane number of those men.
mm,
Because you have
yeah.
World War II and then the Korean War and Vietnam had just
Mm.
started.
I think I would say a high majority of the vortexes would put that as a pretty safe bet that he was part of some regiment, you know, Navy, Army. Was he in World War II? Was he in Vietnam? Was he in, I think that's a pretty safe bet that he at some point had a uniform on.
But that's what's so frustrating about this case is,
Mm,
okay, let's go statistically. Men from, again, 35 to 55 in 1971,
mm-hmm.
most had military service, most
Yeah,
smoked cigarettes.
yeah,
It's like the things
yeah,
that we know for sure about him,
mm,
it's like that
mm,
was everyone. And, what percentage of men in the United States in 1971
mm.
would be between 5'9" and 6'1"? Most of them. What
Yeah,
percentage of those men
mm,
would be white? Most of them, or
yeah,
swarthy or olive
yeah,
skinned.
yeah.
It's still most of the men. Everything about him is so average and so ordinary.
I've got two pieces of paper. One has got the top 50 suspects that we all know about, right? And the other piece of paper is the other 10 million American men. I mean, I think he was American, rather than Canadian. I think because I only realized, I mean, being English, I'm going to get a lot of grief for this. I didn't realize that Canadian Thanksgiving was a different day. I just assumed it was the same day as American Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is Thanksgiving, right? But about 6 months ago, I discovered that it was a different day. So I've got to look at Occam's razor and think to myself, Cooper chose Thanksgiving Eve for a reason. So the chances are he was American rather than Canadian. That's just using Occam razor logic. And it's like I say, I've got the top 50 suspects on one paper, and te the 10 million. I think I worked, I think it's probably 10 million or 7 million or something. And I've got two guys on that piece of paper that no one's ever heard of. Well, actually, that's a lie. One of them is now out in the sort of in the vortex. The other one I've posted him a few times. But mathematically, Cooper is someone that we don't know, right? Mathematically, we know. I mean, I think it's isn't it something like 1,021 or something like that people 302s on suspects, something like that. I might have got that wrong, but there is a certain amount of number of 302 suspects as opposed to 10 million. So the chances are that Cooper is in that bracket rather than that bracket, mathematically. But the FBI are good. The FBI, the more you read, the more the 302s come out. They did their work. They did their legwork. Ryan will posted something the other day. That was another load of legwork, and I'm sure that's financial as well as, running around. So there is a very good chance that Cooper was one of the suspects that we know about.
Do you think that the FBI and or the CIA is covering this up in any way?
I'm going to say no and yes.
Okay. I like that answer. Do you think that the FBI is incompetent or was incompetent in
I
1971?
think the only mistake I mean, I'm not someone like Ryan who, know, absolutely delves into this, but there are a few mistakes. I mean, I would have removed those back seats. I would have. I think, well, maybe they did,
They did
but
remove Cooper's seat.
yeah, yeah, but they did more with the McCoy case because obviously Cooper was really the first. So I think it wasn't the fact that they made mistakes. I think it was the fact that they just kind of was like, well, what is this? We've never really encountered this before. We're not really quite sure what to do. If it was today, people walking on the plane would all have latex gloves on and probably hazmat suits. And I mean, I've heard rumors of people walking in, FBI agents walking in with, smoking.
Oh, of
I might be,
course they were smoking.
yeah. So I mean, what that doesn't. So I wouldn't say incompetence, but the only mistake that drives every single one of us nuts is the fact that they threw away the cigarettes. Because
Yeah, it's a real bummer.
me and you would not be talking if they hadn't. This would be this would have been solved
In
as soon as
1999.
yeah, when the DNA got, or the yeah, when the DNA got to the situation where you can lift DNA from crushed cigarettes, Cooper would be found, and he probably would have still been alive at that point. I think probably in 1999, if my guess works right. But I think that's really the only whether it was a mistake. I mean, there is conspiracy theories relating to that, but I don't know whether it was a mistake or maybe they were. I don't know. It was. I could sit here and say maybe they were told to, but
Well,
I
I mean,
don't.
I got to talk to Larry Carr, and
Mm,
one of the things that was very clear is that he wanted to be the one to solve that case.
absolutely, absolutely.
And he even was like pitching himself, "Hey, put me on the DB Cooper case. I want this. I want to do that."
Mm, mm,
And I truly believe that he wanted to be the guy to perp walk Cooper,
mm,
or if Cooper was dead, be like, "Hey, look, I
mm,
figured this
mm,
all out.
yeah.
I did this. Here I am on TV. I solved the
Mm,
DB Cooper case." High
mm,
five.
yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't think, especially from his point of view, there was no one telling him, "Hey, man, this is already solved, but
Yeah.
go ahead and pretend."
Yeah. No, absolutely not. No, no. I don't think the FBI. I don't think the FBI are covering anything up. Um, no, I don't. I'm sure there was a little bit of incompetence here and there. Someone probably touched this when they shouldn't have done, smoked over this when they shouldn't have done. But I would say, as a general picture, no, there was no incompetence. Just one mistake, which Ryan has always said that it's a bit strange that they destroyed them because they would have been used in a court case, not necessarily the fingerprints off them or anything like that, but it would have shown that this guy smoked Raleigh, so they would have been an association to the cigarettes. So the fact that they were just literally put into a bin or landfill or burnt or whatever, a lot of people think it's strange, but I think probably they tried to get fingerprints off them, they couldn't get it. DNA didn't exist, so they're dirty things. So let's just throw them away. It's a shame. It's a real shame.
It is a real bummer.
Mm,
But moving on from you decide, okay, it's not William J. Smith. I've learned this,
mm,
I've learned that.
mm, mm.
Where do you go from there, Tim?
I got a piece of information. I mean, I got really, the thing is, you spend a lot of time on it. I mean, there's two types of Cooperites. There's people who, you know, go into the mystery page every couple of weeks, just see what's going on. And then there's people who are really into it. I suppose there's probably an upper level than that, people who are literally on the computer all day looking at Cooper. That's probably, but there is generally those two types of people. And I'd spent some time on this, and I'd worked with Dave Foodman and got to know him. And Dave's made his own choice. That's up to him. But I'd made the decision. But I'd got a piece of information relating to something previous to that, which kind of didn't tie in with William J. Smith. But I just put it to the back of my mind. So I kind of was quite, a bit depressed about it. I thought, right, I'm just going to leave the vortex. I sort of, and I'm sure I left various groups, and I mean, I've left various groups about 3 times because I'm diagnosed with bipolar, which is very interesting because the gentleman you had on before is the same, and we go through two different phases, which is mania and depression. So mania is when the way I put this is, if I in my mania phase, I would jump out of a 727 naked. In my depressed phase, you couldn't get me near an airport. I hate flying, which is weird because of the case, but I kind of was a bit depressed, and then various pieces of information. It's like when you're not looking for something, it's always, I don't know if this happens to you, but when you're not looking for something, things tend to happen. I was like, I don't want anything to do with the vortex anymore. And then I got this piece of information. I was contacted by this person. I had this meeting with this person, and every single arrow pointed to the same suspect.
And
And
who's
so
that suspect?
Ted Braden.
How'd you come to Ted Braden?
I bought Paratrooper of Fortune about a year previously when I was in my sort of William J. Smith phase. And I'd read the book and I was more interested in him than him being Cooper. It's just an amazing story.
Absolutely.
But then, as you do, I poo-pooed everything. I was looking at some of my old posts and I posted something like, "But Braden doesn't have a big lower lip." Drew actually responded, "Yes, he does," and then he showed me a photograph of him with a big lower lip. So I apologized, Drew. when you're involved in a suspect, you do tend to try and how do I phrase this? Kill the other suspects because you're trying to make your suspect Cooper. You try to pick out every little thing that isn't, you know, that means that your suspect isn't Cooper. So you try to, it goes on a lot. I mean, everybody, you got to be honest, it does. So I've
Oh yeah.
got posts from years, probably a year previous to that. Definitely wasn't Braden. I love Braden's story, but it definitely wasn't him because I kind of was a bit more that Cooper was more of a either an amateur parachutist or didn't know anything about parachuting. That was the world I was kind of in, and Smith kind of fitted in the middle where you could kind of almost prove that he'd trained in parachutes. So it kind of fitted what I need. But then I started, you reread Tusaw, and the guy knew D-rings, the guy knew packing cards, and then various other pieces of information. I am adamant, whether it was Ted Braden or not, Cooper was a skydiver.
I think that's very safe to say.
I mean, your analogy, and Ryan's got a similar one, where if you never ridden a horse, would you use a horse to ride away from bank robbery? It's your wheelhouse. You would use what you know,
Absolutely.
and
Especially if you think you're good at something.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but the whole crux of this Cooper case for me is Cooper's calmness. That is the whole Cooper was. I mean, I've gone through sort of you get these occasional 302s, or people will say to you, but it can't be Ted because Cooper was timid. Cooper was constantly worried. But then you've got this new information I think it's from Radicek, that he was cool, and what he could hear was that he knew what he was doing. And so there's conflicting information about whether Cooper was this timid guy sat there constantly asking, oh, I'm sure he did ask if there was air marshals on the plane. Why wouldn't you? But one of the narrative in Bruce's very early podcast with yourself was that Cooper actually told that cowboy to sit down. That is not a timid guy,
No.
whether you believe that narrative or not. But if that is true, you do tend to lean towards the narrative that fits your suspect. It's just human nature. It's just human nature. But
I think the fact that he's calm, cool, and collected, I think it says a couple of things.
mm,
I think that does come with age. So if you
hmm
look at like a McCoy who would have been a Green Beret or who
yeah,
was a Green Beret,
yeah,
who had all this crazy Vietnam experience, who was a daredevil, he was a skydiver. He did not have the ability to be calm, cool, and collected, and he didn't
hmm
have the ability to keep control of the entire situation.
hmm yeah,
But, Cooper is pegged to being like 20 years older than McCoy.
hmm
So there is some calmness and some maturity that comes with age.
hmm
But the other thing is the idea that you're going to do this crazy crime and this is sort of the first time you've done something like this and you're going
hmm
to be able to control the situation
hmm
the way Cooper did. I
hmm
really think that speaks to someone who has planned and executed crazy operations before.
Well, my first note on I've done a bit of a Cooper and I've written some notes out. My first note is team leader. Cooper was a team leader, in my view. He may not have cared about the stewardesses or the pilots, but he offered them meals. Now that's in his benefit. That's if you're someone who leads a team, you may not particularly care about the men under you, and managers of businesses don't really care about the minions, but they'll give them a pay rise because that'll make them feel happier. They'll work harder, more money for the company. If you're a team leader, you've got to make sure that everyone that's helping you with your task is happy. And I think that's one of the reasons also maybe the Benzedrine or whatever the pills were. Cooper had a plan, and these people were part of the plan. And the Benzedrine, in my view, was I'm still not 100% sure whether he offered it to the stewardesses or the pilots, or maybe he said to the stewardesses, I've got Benzedrine on me, maybe the pilots might. But that's him thinking, I need these people to be alert. I need these people to be well fed. I'm looking after these people. So the Cooper loveliness, which I do think there is a certain element from information that I've been told. Um, he was a nice guy, but I do think there is an element of keeping everyone keeping everyone right, making sure that they didn't get too stressed by keeping the stress down himself. And I just feel that he was like, he was either someone who managed people in a business or he was someone who managed people in war or in battle. So I think Cooper's a team leader.
It is so interesting that he requested meals for the flight crew.
Mm,
I just, is there another robbery situation like that that goes
no.
on where they're
Mm,
like, hey, some of these people might be hungry. It's
mm,
not, it's not 2 days that the
mm,
skyjacking goes on for. It's
no.
5 hours.
Yeah.
So just the idea that he asks for meals for the flight crew. And it also shows that he knows that that was their last stop and the crew was done.
Mm,
I really believe that. I believe he knew
mm,
that that was the final stop of that plane. So
yeah.
he knew he would be taking them on an adventure that pushed them past
Yeah.
punching out at work.
Mm. And that's a team that, that's what I was saying. I think that he was keeping them sweet. He was thinking whether it was either the fact that he was a nice guy, even though he was a criminal. I mean, my suspicion is that he was a father because there was, there's a sort of lots of talk about him joking with the stewardesses, and obviously, the chances are he was probably in his mid 40s or up to 50, or when it was, there's a new suspect that's just come out who's in his 60s, but you know, I think he was probably a family man. I just get that feeling. There's the sort of the laughing, the joking, and the you know, so that's probably where the nicety came. But I do think there is an element of you're helping me with my job. Without you guys, I'm screwed. I'm screwed. I need you guys alert, well fed. And I know that they didn't eat the meals, did they? The dogs ate the meals, but
Yeah.
I think I think there's a certain. I think it's a balance between. I think there was a nice guy in there somewhere, but I do think it was an operation in his mind. It was a task, and I think he needed to keep them under control to certain, but you know, keep them awake.
What were the crew meals? I want to say it was like Salisbury steak or something like that.
I'm not sure, but wasn't it the was it Alsatians or the dogs came in and just basically ate them all?
Yeah.
This is craziness, but yeah.
All right. Speaking of dogs being on the plane, Tim,
Hmm.
I've got a real serious question for you.
Right.
What are the odds that Cooper never jumped from the plane? He hid on the plane, and then after it was searched, he casually walked off.
Zero. I
Zero.
mean,
Okay.
I mean, I would give you 0.1% because, if it was Ted Braden, I think he probably could have, there is this sort of theory about the delayed jump. I mean, if it was Ted, I would not be surprised if he jumped off the stairs, hung on them, or maybe, I mean, I'm joking, but hung on the stairs and then maybe climbed on the top of the plane and sat on there for a minute, and then, like in that film with the bomb where the guy rides the bomb down. But no, there is no chance. No chance.
Okay. How about this other theory that I just came up with right now myself? What if Cooper never existed and the flight crew was all in on it together and made him up?
0% on that one as well. Zero. Absolute zero. I mean, it does come up a lot in from people. You used to see posts of people that had never posted before. Cooper didn't exist. It was, one of the pilots looks exactly like Cooper. He's got his sunglasses on. They all did it for this money. I mean, how did they get the money off the plane? The sniffer dogs would have, it's a crazy theory. It's absolutely crazy.
It's crazy. And I kind of understand why, but it does, it still surprises me that people will watch one doc and watch or read one book or whatever,
Mm,
and then they immediately come up with one of those two theories. He
mm.
hid on the plane or the crew made him up.
I actually semi-jokingly watched this. It was a video on YouTube of a psychic. Because I'm just, it's not my world, but It was just something I just wanted to see what a psychic would come up with, because obviously a psychic, a lot of people do believe in that kind of thing. And I was thinking, and she was like, he hid on the plane. So I thought, well, okay, let me just see if I can work out where he hid on the plane. And I think she said he hid in the compartment under the plane where the suitcases are. Well, how did he get there? Oh, the plane landed and then immediately got off and then just quickly. I mean, it's there is nowhere on that plane that he could have got into while it was flying, or got into when it landed without anybody seeing. It's just a crazy theory. It really is.
It's so crazy. I always
Mm.
tell people right away, have you ever been on an airplane? Does there seem like there's a ton of extra space?
Mm. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
they're using every square
Mm.
inch of that aluminum tube.
I think there is one. I might be wrong, but I think there's one little compartment, and I think it might be up near the cockpit that a human, if you were one of these people who can contort your body into a certain size, would
I think it's
probably.
actually near the aft stairs.
Oh,
There
it's
is
near
a
the. Oh, it's near there.
compartment
Right.
where
Mm.
you could fit a person inside,
Hmm.
but the problem is it screws on from the outside.
Right. Okay.
So
Okay.
are we then saying that he hid in there and then Tina screwed it back on for him?
Oh, because Tina was in on it.
Yeah.
No, no, Tina, I promise. I'm joking. I'm joking. No, you weren't. But yeah, it's a crazy theory. It's crazy. Both of those theories.
Do you think the flight path is accurate?
Yeah, I think there is probably a chance of a little bit of. I'll give it a little bit of a waiver either side. But I mean, you've had people discuss this ad nauseum. Sage radar, the plane. The fact that it was tracked the whole way. I admire Eric for the Ulysses flight path. I really do. Um, and there's nothing wrong with being an outlier, but me personally, well, let me put it this way: if it turned out that it was completely different because of the Cooper case, because this case is just so all over the place, I would not fall off my chair if it turned out that it did go slightly west or east or Clay Ellum. No, 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 Clay Ellum. But if it absolutely if modern technology could go back in time and work out exactly the way it went and it was not the same, I wouldn't fall off my chair. But I think the technology at the time tracked that plane as best it could, and I think I would say 99% correct.
Where are you putting Cooper's drop zone? So the FBI sort of originally had him in Ariel,
Yeah.
Amboy,
Mm,
and then that sort of
mm,
moved a little bit further south. And some people are now
yeah.
even saying like much closer to the Columbia. Where are
Mm.
you at on his drop zone?
Well, I think personally Cooper was trying to get back to Portland. I think he was trying to get back a specific place. So I think he was heading back in that direction. I mean, there is people who think that he wanted to jump as soon as the plane took off in Seattle. So why didn't he? Why didn't he say to the crew, I'm not, this is the thing that people sometimes forget. He had a bomb, whether it was true, whether it was real or not. He could have said, I'm not ready. I'm not taking off for another half an hour. And they would have had to have done but they took off. Then he messed around for half an hour and then he jumped. Why didn't he just say, right, I'll be ready in half an hour. We'll take off and then jump. So I think he jumped exactly where he wanted to. But I think he was heading in the right direction. And also, it kind of makes sense. You take off, you know, you take off from somewhere, you fly somewhere else, fly to a destination, and you want to get back to where you started. That's what I think anyway. So where did he jump? I mean, I do trust Chris Cunningham with the flight path. I mean, that guy has hammered down into that. Um, and there's talk of sort of he jumped at. It's all to do with the oscillations and the pressure bump, isn't it? So you've got to try and work out exactly when that happened, and then kind of work out what the drift was. There is talk that maybe he was even further south, which is fantastic from my point of view. I think he was heading back to Portland. So as close to Portland as possible. I mean, I was kind of like Battleground Orchards, kind of around about there, but I think maybe there might be some revelation that maybe it was even closer to Portland than that.
All right. So in the UK, your latitude is real similar to the Pacific Northwest.
Okay.
So you're going to experience some pretty similar weather over there and a pretty similar dawn and dusk,
Okay.
depending on the year, time of the year.
Yeah.
Sunset in Seattle on November 24th, 1971 was
Hmm.
4:30 p.m.
Hmm.
Cooper boards the plane in Portland at 2:50.
Yeah.
Do you think Cooper wanted a night jump?
100%.
Absolutely. He
A
had to
hundred
have known
percent. Yeah.
because it's printed in the paper then.
Hmm.
What time is dusk and what time is sunset? And if you're
Mm.
familiar with the area, I said dusk and sunset, dawn and sunset.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're familiar with the area, you would know by 5 o'clock it is going to be pitch dark.
Yeah. I mean, there is that sort of element of he was getting a bit angry, you know. I mean, he said, "I want to land." I mean, didn't he actually say, "I want everything by 5 o'clock"? Is that correct?
Something like that. I
Yeah.
wanted before we land, and I want it by 5 o'clock or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is. I mean, that means that he knew. You know, that there's no doubt about the fact that he knew it was going to jump at night time. No, no, no doubt. I mean, and obviously the plane, from what I understand, was later than that. It landed at, was it sort of 5:40 or something like that? I'm not into the little elements like that. I go out of my brain, but yeah, he absolutely planned a night jump, and absolutely, in my view, planned it in inclement in an inclement element of inclement part of the country. You know, I mean, there's been talk about why didn't he jump in Florida? You know, I think he knew exactly what he was doing.
Do you think, okay, I I just got this information. It's top secret. It is exactly the flight path down to the 10th of the mile and
Yeah.
exactly the point that Cooper jumped out of the airplane.
Hmm.
And it even shows the exact point Cooper landed on the ground
Hmm.
in 1971.
Yeah.
But I just got that information today.
Yeah.
Does that do us any good?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I mean, I'd love to know exactly the spot where he landed. That I don't think it would help. It might help in the sort of it might give an indication in the direction he was heading, but the plane was obviously there was nothing he could do about the direction the plane was heading. But the thing I struggle with is there was no instructions. You know, the plane could have flown over the sea. He was taking a major risk, but I do think there was an element of coercion in that sort of, you know, he kind of where he wanted to eventually, obviously he was never going to land where he told them to. I think there was a sort of a bit of coercion in the sense that it kind of narrowed the direction and essentially put him on the right flight path. But yeah, your question's a great question. If we knew exactly where Cooper landed, would it make a difference? It might make a difference to the Tina Bar theory, possibly.
That's true. If we figure out he landed on Tina Bar, then boy, does that change
Yeah,
a lot of things.
yeah. I mean, that's one thing. But going back to what I said earlier, if it turned out that he landed on Tina Bar, I wouldn't fall off my chair. But I don't think it's the case.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of things in this case, I wouldn't be shocked
Yeah.
to learn that I was completely wrong and that it was
Mhm.
complete
Yeah.
opposite of what I thought because
Yeah.
it's happened a few times.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Does Cooper survive his jump?
100%.
What makes you so confident in that, Tim?
Well, how did the money get to Tina Bar? I mean, I've got a theory about that. There's, you know, the fact that nothing was found, a body, a parachute in a tree. You know, one of the things I forgot about is buzzards. You know, birds. You know, the birds that peck. You know, find dead bodies. I mean, I didn't even think about that. I mean, if there was a dead body in the middle of a field or in the, or the, apparently they do congregate quite quickly, and it is a noticeable event. Um, you know, these type of birds. But I don't know. I mean, the statistics are so low compared to, you know, I think it's 2 million jumps or 20 million. I can't remember what the figure is. There's been 7 deaths, and I think 6 of those were suicides. So it is basically a no pull. I mean, there is okay. Let me reduce it. Let me make it 99%. There is a chance that he no pulled. He passed out. He got sucked into the back of the plane. I mean, there is a chance. I just don't personally believe it. And and Ryan's spoken to various gentlemen who've within the right organizations who've said, we knew within a week or 2 weeks that he survived. I tend to believe them.
I do too.
Mm.
I think if he dies in the jump, he dies pulling his parachute, and
Hmm.
then he's found immediately. I
Hmm.
mean, if not before the sun comes up, he's found
Hmm.
the second the sun comes up.
I think there's more chance of him being injured. That's probably my 1%, is him landing, cracking his leg, and then, what are you going to do? You're gonna crawl to a little forest and just sit there and possibly pass away. That's a possible chance, an injury, a severe injury, because obviously, as you know, he picked a 24-foot parachute. So there is, and had lots of money on him. So I think there's more chance of him landing and dying, landing, surviving, and then, dying sitting somewhere than just literally auguring into the ground. That's personal. So that's what I'll give my 1% of is
Yeah,
I
but I
don't think
still
he
think
literally,
if he's injured and then dies, he's
yeah,
found right away.
yeah. I mean, unless he was some kind of paramilitary guy who was trained that if you do that, you crawl into a copse and you hide yourself under something and then you just perish. Because some of the stories I've heard about paratroopers and in the wars and it's horrific. It's basically shooting each other because they knew they were going to land in a certain area. So that's my 1%. He landed, he broke his leg and or broke had a major injury, had a bit of training, and thought, right, I'm going to go and hide myself. But then where did the money go? And so, I think it's very slim that he died.
Where did his money go?
I knew you were going to ask this. Um, I mean, I came up with a Tina Bar theory, which, and I was going back to admiring Eric as an outlier. There's nothing wrong with being an outlier. My theory about Tina Bar is that there is a big stake in the ground which essentially identifies exactly who DB Cooper was. But I actually don't think DB Cooper was ever on Tina Bar. I'll tell you what I'll do is I will read you a Tina Bar theory that I was given. See, I came up with my Tina Bar theory, and then I was provided this by you know, without going into too much details, an ex-Vietnam veteran, and this is his theory. Um, so I mean, there's a bit more to it, but I'll start with it. Braden was likely involved in some way in the clandestine operations using 727s in Southeast Asia. Maybe he was directly involved in the drops, or he was one of the test parachutists. He knew too much about the workings of the 727. After the heist, the agency involved had to suspect an inside job. They probably contacted everyone involved. They found Braden. They couldn't prosecute him because their activities in Southeast Asia would get exposed. They had two options: suicide him or pay him off. They probably paid him off. He gave them back the ransom money. The agency buried some of the money, expecting someone would find it sooner than they did. They did that to bolster their claim that DB Cooper didn't survive the jump. They burnt the rest of the money. Case closed, and it is why none of the money showed up in circulation. So there's my Tina Bar theory through someone else.
So Braden could have had the money taken away from him.
Hmm. I mean, I'll give you, whether Ted was Cooper or not, it's a very interesting story. I mean, his best mate was the CIA,
Yeah.
right? It was the CIA. Now, are you telling me that his best mate wasn't watching the TV that night and thinking that looks awfully like my best friend or what, my mate? This looks like the kind of thing my friend would do, right? So I think even that morning, Ted's phone rang, but he was probably still walking back, back to his truck. There's no way on earth that the CIA were not interested in this case. Do you agree?
Oh, I absolutely agree.
Right. Now, Jack Singlob was the leader, was the CIA. Now, I mean, uh, this is hypothesizing. I think there was a phone call. Ted, was that you? Yeah, I'm sorry. I got bored. I just wanted to show off. I needed the cash. Okay, Ted. We'll be round soon. We'll take that money back because as soon as you start spending that money, that's gonna link you to various bits and bobs. I think. I mean, but it gets even more complicated than that. I'm actually you know about Cooper letter 6, right? The one that
Absolutely.
signed off a rich man. Now that indicates that Cooper went to the Bahamas. Okay, this is a complicated story, so you'll just have to bear with me on this. I know a lot about offshore banking. It's a major part of my world. That's where you go. Turks and Caicos. That's where you go to 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 sort your money out, let's say. Okay. So I think I've actually got a linguistics forensic person who just happened to work with us, who is analysing the Rampards letter, the wife letter, as I call it, and Cooper letter number 6. She's looking at those three documents together and analysing it to see if it was written by the same person. And I actually ran them through stylometry as well, because obviously there was the barb issue. I'm not, I mean, stylometry is something that's not my world at all. I'd never even really heard of it before, but I ran it through and some interesting things came up. But if you look at letter 6, it indicates that Cooper went to the Bahamas. So I'm wondering whether Ted, how much money, you jumped from the plane. How much money did you eventually get away with? Oh, I got away with 100 grand. So it wouldn't surprise me if he maybe did something with some of the money. Um, you know, laundered's not quite the right word, but exchanged is probably a better word. But I do think that he had, I mean, none of the money's ever come up in circulation apart from the 6,000, right?
Right.
I think the CIA took that money back off him, and I think they buried it because they wanted to. This was one of their men, right? This is one of their guys who apparently continued to work for them into the 80s, apparently. Um, and they wanted to prove that Cooper died. And they wanted, and a great way to prove that Cooper died was that he just landed in the Columbia. So I've got, there's all little intricate parts to my Tina Bar theory, but it all works with the science because the money did not get in the river that night. The money was subjected to the river in the spring, summertime. Um, the money did not arrive in a flood. There is no silt on that money. The money didn't walk to the Tina Bar and wipe itself down. So there's no, you can in my view, you can discount flooding and you can discount any time except for the spring and summer. So my specific Tina Bar theory is that it was buried in the spring, summer. Well, I need to be more specific about this because I need to do a bit more investigation, but there was a flood in the spring of 72. I think the money was buried just after that in the summer of 72 by by not by Cooper himself to indicate that Cooper had died. And I think it was supposed to be found quite quickly, you know. And I think it was, people laugh at this, but I think it was dunked. I think it was wet on purpose because if you found dry money, he didn't land in the river. If you find wet money, Columbia, well, wet money, he's died in the river and it's washed up. So to me, that all makes sense. But I know there'll be people laughing at me, but that's my Tina Bar theory. And I do think people will have to work this out for themselves. I think there's a big signpost in that piece of ground which tells you exactly who Cooper was.
And what's that?
TB.
So it's not an homage to Tina Mucklow. The TB is an homage to Ted Braden.
I think it was an indication to Ted Braden that they'd sorted out his problem. That's my, I mean, but I've got this thing in my, I've got this thing that I always think about an idea, but I think there's chances of me, a little old me living in Gosport, UK, being right are probably very slim. So because if I was always right, I'd win the lottery all the time and I'd be a mega millionaire. So the chances are that I'm right are probably slim, but I feel I think there's something in that kind of story. I think the money I mean, put it this way, that money was planted.
And with
Science.
Ted Braden, that's not out of the realm of possibility because if you
Mm,
would have told me,
mm,
hey, I know about this one guy who was
mm,
special forces in Vietnam, and then he
mm,
just went AWOL and decided to work as a mercenary in the Congo, and then he's captured, guess what happened to him? I would be like,
mhm,
oh, he's getting a public hanging, life
mm,
in military prison. What
yeah.
is it? No, he's just let out because there's not enough staff to do a court to
Let
do
me
a
let me
trial
yeah.
that day.
Well, that let me go back to the calmness element of Cooper. Of all the suspects that you've ever heard of, which one would probably not be bothered if he was caught on that plane?
That's a good point.
A year in jail? Go on, Ted, go off to Mauritius and knock off that, That's what it would be. So that I actually think if it is Ted Braden, he didn't care if he was caught. I really don't think he cared.
He didn't.
The FBI came in, they arrested him. They arrested him. He put into a jail cell. Ryan jokes about this, the Hollywood, someone coming along the jail cell. Ted, can you've been a very naughty boy, Ted, but if you can just do this for us, you'll be in there for a year and you'll be out. And if of all the suspects that you've ever heard of, which one would not care if he was caught the most?
Well, I mean, you even have, I love this story that Drew Breeson
Mm,
found, but,
mm,
Ted gets pulled over for a DUI when he's like
hmm
72 years old.
Yep,
No license, no
yep,
registration, no
hmm
identification on him, and
yep,
he refused to identify himself.
yep,
Who does that?
yeah.
Also, if you're going to drink and drive, it would be a good idea to have license and registration at the very least.
Mm. I mean, he was a truck driver. Does that mean he never had a license? That was his job. His job was a truck driver. Maybe he never had a driving license, but it didn't matter. It's almost like nothing mattered to him. And that's why I think there is a very good chance he was Cooper because he was calm. He just didn't. I don't think he would have cared if the FBI had boarded that plane and arrested him, but I don't think he wanted that. I don't think he wanted that at all. But, you know, I just think the calmness is the key, in my view.
Speaking of Braden being a truck driver, how would you account for the particles on the tie if Ted Braden is Cooper?
Ding ding, big reveal. Ding ding, big reveal. Um, Chris Brower found the 3 days ago, I think it was, posted it in my in my Facebook group. Thanks, Chris. And I want to thank Chris for one other thing as well in a minute. But um, Consolidated Freightways had a metallurgy department close to Tina Bar.
What are the odds?
Obviously everyone in the Braden camp is like, right, let's get some titanium in this, you know. But there is links to Boeing, there is links to Boeing. The certain trucks used Boeing engines and Cooper tires, which I thought was quite funny. One of the biggest tire companies in America at the time for trucks was Cooper tires. And these are all the little things that you laugh at and you think, oh, that's another puzzle piece for Ted there, you know. Um, but yeah, Chris posted on my Facebook page, I've just found the metallurgy department, and it was around between 1965 and 1971.
How far from Tina Bar is it?
I'd have to go back onto my site. I can't remember. I mean, there's a photograph, there's a map of the plant, and then there's like the river that goes north with Tina Bar there. I can't remember. It's probably not as close as when I say close. It's not. I don't think it's like literally next door, but it's within a small map radius. It's close enough to be interesting.
Yeah, there's a
But the other,
big, Vancouver has a big industrial park sort of
yeah,
on the west side of town in between
mhm,
where Tina Bar would be and the city of
mhm,
Vancouver. The
yeah.
the, the city part
mhm,
of Vancouver. That west area along the river is a very industrial
mhm.
area.
I hope I'm not getting this wrong because I'm going to look like a fool. But I do remember. I was so shocked by it. I was so like, oh my goodness, metallurgy department, consolidated freightways. Because a day earlier, I'd found a gentleman, and um, I posted on my Facebook again. It was a semi-joking post, and it was, I think the tie belongs to, and it was the name of a gentleman, and he's the only person in human history that worked for Crucible Steel and Consolidated Freightways, and he was the same age as Ted. So it was a bit of a, there's a connection there. The chances are very slim that there's any, but I just thought it's funny that Ted could have pinched this guy's tie. He was the same age as Ted, and this guy worked for Crucible Steel as well as Consolidated Freightways, and he's the only person that, as far as I'm aware, that worked for both those companies. So I posted a semi-joking, but then like 2 days later, Chris blew my little thing out of the water with this metallurgy. But then you look at Consolidated Freightways had a depot incredibly close to Crucible Steel, and the thing about the tie is the tie was really dirty. I mean, it wasn't just a few specks here and there. It was a dirty tie. It was everything everywhere. Now that to me is more of someone who is moving waste around, industrial waste, metal waste, rather than someone who's working on a specific. And the the more different type of particles, that to me that more leads to someone who is doing that job rather than someone who's working on a specific project. Because you've if you're working on titanium and antimony, why would you have gold? Why would you have all the others? Whereas in the dirtier the tie, in my mind, is it someone who was just shifting stuff? But obviously that ties into Ted, so I mean it's you know confirmation bias.
Absolutely, a little bit. Do you
Mm.
think the bomb was real?
Oh, I go back and forth on this one. 1 minute I think it is, 1 minute I think it isn't. I mean, the thing that makes me think it possibly is just this stripped wire. I mean, why would you why would you go to so much effort to make it look so real? But Ted would have been able to make a real bomb. But I just don't, I'm going to say 50-50 because I could ramble on for half an hour and you don't want that.
The bomb's an interesting one
Mm,
because when I came into the vortex, I would have said 50-50.
mm,
And then a year later or 2 years later, I'm 95% sure that it's fake.
mm,
And now I'm back to 50-50. I might even be leaning
yeah,
towards being real.
yeah,
Maybe I'm 51-49
yeah.
that it's real.
But then you've got people who say that, dynamite never came in that color or,
But it
I mean,
did. It did.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've seen red, I've seen
Mm,
brown, I've seen orange, I've seen
mm,
tan.
mm. It would make more sense to some suspects to be flares. It would make more sense. I mean, there's a MACV-SOG um, kit with flares in it, and it would
But
make
what's
more.
he going to use flares for?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you know, I've heard people that one of the vortexes that I work very closely with told me that she has had stories from people that they saw flares that night. But that really goes against someone like Ted because he would light himself up. He chose nighttime for a reason. He chose inclement weather for a reason. And I'm not specifically talking about Ted. Let's imagine it was another military man. He chose everything for a reason. So flares would be a silly idea. But then you hear stories that they saw flares, so maybe he was on the ground. I just don't know. It would make more sense if they were flares, but I am going to have to say 50-50. I just and it also depends who the suspect was, I think. If it was a real sleazeball who knew how to make bombs, I think it would probably be a real bomb. But if it was, you know, it isn't William J. Smith, in my opinion. But if it was William J. Smith, he would not have made a real bomb. But
True.
Ted
And
is
the flares thing, I think that is based on a couple of different stories that have been mixed up.
right. Okay.
So I think there is a story of someone seeing flares at night in the
Hmm.
days or potentially the weeks before the jump,
Okay.
and then that got reported. And then
Mhm.
I can't remember the other suspect, but part of their story was the accomplice like shot a flare into the air.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
he could see that and then start walking that direction.
Yeah.
And I think those have sort of gotten mixed up because
Maybe. Maybe.
if you're seeing a flare in the sky that night, and
Mm.
you better believe there are dudes watching the sky for any activity,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're gonna be like, "Oh, I saw this flare over here. Go track that down, see what that's about."
Yeah.
And if I'm Cooper on the plane with my fake bomb made of flares,
Hmm.
and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna toss some of these flares out of the back of the plane
Hmm.
to throw off the FBI. Well, you know
Hmm.
what that does? That's a breadcrumb trail.
Hmm.
So they know, oh, we saw one flare over Tacoma. We saw another flare over Centralia. We saw another flare over Longview, and then no more flares. That means he must have jumped out near Woodland.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe the bomb was not a bomb, and maybe the clock was a watch. I mean, it's come out. Sorry to reveal. Sorry if this upset anyone. Revealing Cooper didn't have a watch. He kept asking the time. And then there's a TED theory, quite an interesting TED theory with relating to that, which there's a fantastic guy in my group called Mike, who is a paratrooper, and his knowledge and sort of guesswork, if it was Ted Braden, of what he would do and how he would use his watch to I don't really know what this means, but how he would use his watch to descend, timing it. But Cooper apparently didn't have a watch. But MacV Soggs had a very specific looking watch. So maybe Cooper hid his hand in the case because he had a very strange looking watch and didn't want to reveal it. But you know, sorry, I forgot the question. I'm sorry.
I forgot the question too. Let's talk about
Yeah,
watches.
let's talk about. Yeah, I mean,
That's a really interesting thing because the first time I heard that,
mhm,
if I'm planning and executing this operation,
yeah,
obviously I don't have a cell phone.
yeah,
It's 1971.
hmm,
Knowing the time seems pretty damn important.
that is critical. Yeah.
So I could I could have gone to whatever the Walmart equivalent was. I could have gone to J.C. Penney
Mm,
in 1971 and picked up a Timex
mm,
for 18 bucks,
mhm.
and voila, I got a nice watch and I know the time.
But you know the story. Which suspect had his watch taken away from him, didn't get it back, and then from what we can understand, we don't think wore a watch after that point. Had his watch taken away from him. And that's a very famous Ted Braden story. And look, I've analysed that photograph of him in 1975, and he is not wearing a watch, which seems strange for a man of that age. But you know, it's a little piece which probably means nothing. But the fact that Cooper didn't have a watch is odd. That is odd. Maybe he had it on the hand that apparently he never took out of the suit of the case the whole first 2.5 hours, which must have been painful, if nothing else, to keep your hand in the same position for 2.5 hours. God, so he maybe was hiding something.
But that tells you so it would have been his right hand that's in the case.
Yeah,
So typically you wear your watch on your non-dominant hand.
yeah,
So if he is wearing a watch but it's in the case,
yeah.
then odds are he's a lefty.
I wore for the first, I'm 50 years old. For the first 40 years of my life, I wore my watch on my right hand, and I'm right-handed. Because to me, it's just like, you look at your hand. But then I realized that that's not the way to do it. I suppose it's to do with writing, isn't it? Because you write with your right hand, and then obviously if you've got a watch in the way, it makes it more difficult. But I mean, I've got a theory on the left-handedness as well, and I've got a theory on why he turned right and why he smoked with his left hand.
Let's hear it.
So I was driving somewhere, and I'm a smoker, and I was having a cigarette out the window, Now I live in the UK, so what hand have I got out of the window?
You've got your right hand out the window.
Now, what hand would a trucker have out of his window in America?
He would have his left hand out the window.
Okay. Now you're going when I get into my car in the UK, I turn left, right? Does that make sense?
Yep,
Now, if I was driving in America, I would get in on the right. I would turn right to get into my driving seat. So
that's
my
true.
theory, so my theory is, and Ted was a smoker. I'm not calling him a heavy smoker. He was a smoker because I actually don't believe Cooper was a heavy smoker because I am, and I'm desperate for a cigarette. But anyway, but Cooper sat there for 2.5 hours and had seven cigarettes, or seven out of the eight, wasn't it? But then, from what it seems like, it was almost like he almost sort of forgot he was a smoker because I don't think there's nothing in the 302s or no Tina or no one said that he smoked anymore noticeably after that period of time when he stood up and started, you know. I look at the hijack in two sections. I look at it as in the sitting down section and the standing up sections. So in the sitting down section, he smoked seven cigarettes. In the standing up, doing the money, all that, it doesn't seem like he smoked any cigarettes. Although there is that half-hour period when nobody really knows what happened. So the chances are he probably had a cigarette.
Oh, if you're
But
Cooper, are you lighting a cigarette on the back stairs before the jump?
if it, I'm going to say it again, if it was Ted Braden, absolutely.
I'm not a smoker. If I'm
You
about to
are
jump
anyway.
off that
You're going to
plane,
do it anyway.
I'm
Yeah,
lighting up a cigarette on the back stairs, like,
yeah, yeah,
all right, here we
yeah,
go.
yeah,
Now seems like the greatest time of ever to smoke a cigarette.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this goes back what I'm saying. That you know, you've got a suspect, and you use the knowledge that you know about that suspect to make up a story, and that's why I'm going to write a book at some point because working with some amazing people who've given me some amazing geography, whether Ted Braden is Cooper or not, I could make up a fantastic story. Um, where he started, the reason why he was here, his trek back, why he turned right on the plane, why he smoked with his left hand, why he hid his hand in the suitcase, why he didn't have a watch, why he didn't have a wedding ring. Everything fits with Ted, but it's kind of almost irrelevant, really. It's just a good story, which would fit the story. But again, suspect bias.
Watching Wedding Ring is kind of interesting
Mm,
because I don't wear a watch, but I
mm,
do wear a wedding ring.
mm,
And I mean, we're living a different time, but if I was going to commit some sort of crime where I know I'm not going to be filmed or videoed
mm,
and people are, it's just going to be eyewitness description,
mm,
I probably would, maybe I would put on a watch at this point
mm.
and ditch my wedding ring.
Yeah.
So did Cooper do something along those same lines? Like he had one watch at home and he had a wedding ring.
Mm.
So he ditches the wedding ring and his watch that he normally wears, he leaves that at home also.
I mean, I am Mr. Misdirection. Mr. Misdirection. I think Cooper was lots of lots of misdirection. Some wasn't misdirection, but I mean, I believe that he Cooper didn't smoke Riley cigarettes because all the posters after the man was, we're looking for a man who smoked Riley cigarettes, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to smoke Marlboro, but on that trip, you're going to smoke Riley cigarettes and you're going to leave the butts behind because Cooper took everything. He took matchbooks, but he left the cigarette butts behind. So people found Riley cigarettes. So I think I might be, am I wrong here? In the Cooper wanted poster, I think I might be wrong, but I'm sure there's one of those posters that says we're looking for a man who smokes Riley cigarettes. You're right.
I'm looking around the room for my, I can't see
Oh yeah,
which
yeah.
one it have
Cool.
for you.
No, I might be wrong. I might be wrong, but but it
But yeah,
seems
it's
like
definitely one of the
yeah,
things that they put
yeah,
out.
It's
Smoked Raleigh
it's
filter tip
yeah.
cigarettes.
It seems like an obvious misdirect to me, especially the fact that he didn't take them back. You know, you know, smoke. I smoke bed. I usually smoke Benson Hedges, so for this, I'm gonna smoke Raleighs. It just seems like an obvious misdirect to me, but maybe he wasn't that clever. I don't know. I'm not saying I'm clever, but it just seems a really obvious misdirect.
I agree with you, especially I'm on the camp of this is super well planned and thought out, more so
Hmm.
than he scribbled this on a napkin the night before.
Yeah, yeah.
And I assume you're in that same boat.
I agree with. I, I, I agree with Ryan's logic in that Cine is too much of a coincidence. That the chances of two men thinking about that, I think Cine was the inspiration. I mean, 13 days, you know, there's nothing that Cooper couldn't have done that he couldn't have thought up in 13 days. I think,
Well,
especially if you
clearly
were
he was
some,
able to improvise on the plane, so 13 days is plenty of time.
yeah. I think especially if you were some kind of person who was involved in operations. I think if you were used to, guys, in a week's time, we've got to invade this camp, or in 3 day or a half an hour's time, right, let's quickly sort out a plan. Um, yeah, I think there's a lot of misdirection going on. But then I suppose you could say, well, when he was offered the parachute instructions, he said, no, I don't need those. Well, that wasn't a misdirection because if it is Ted Braden, he didn't need those. So you would have thought, well, a misdirection would have been, yeah, I need to read those. So you get your brain caught up in this. But I think there are some um, things that Cooper did, which to me would be an obvious way of making you go one direction where actually it was a different direction.
And Ted Braden would have 1,000,000% had training on what to do if you're captured,
Hmm.
what they're going to look for, how to
Yeah.
act, how to
Hmm.
behave.
Hmm.
Because not only was that a potential for him, but in many situations, likely that he
Hmm.
would be captured by the enemy.
Yeah. And also making yourself look different.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've watched some recent CIA interviews with a lady who is whose main job was making CIA operatives look like they didn't look. That's the only easiest way. You know, putting pebbles in your shoes so that you walk differently, putting pieces of foam in your mouth so that you look like something out of The Godfather. I mean, we laugh at that kind of stuff. Wearing there was a thing about if you're a tourist in a certain, I can't remember what it was, but don't look like an American tourist in certain countries because you'll get taken out. It's make it, I think I don't know whether Cooper was disguised, and I'm not, not talking about Ted here. I don't know whether he was in a disguise, but I think he was trying to make himself look like something that he wasn't.
I agree. I wouldn't say disguise. I would say
Yeah,
that he was presenting himself as something he wasn't.
yeah, yeah.
Just
You know,
like, Ted Braden probably doesn't spending a lot of time in a suit and tie, but he would know that's
mm,
pretty standard fare for flying on an
mm,
airplane.
yeah,
And I can present myself as a businessman with my
hmm,
fancy attache case and my
hmm,
trench coat, and no one will notice me.
yeah. Um, I mean, the sunglasses, which it's just a genius because they take away age, they take away um expressions. You know, I actually wear sunglasses a lot because I'm quite and they're prescription sunglasses, so they are essentially my glasses. And people say, well, why are you constantly wearing sunglasses? Because I struggle with the light. But yeah, genius. Takes away any it takes years off you. So maybe he was older. I mean, I don't particularly. My personal opinion is he wasn't, but maybe he was. Maybe, but speaking to Mike, who's the paratrooper, there's another reason for the sunglasses. Adjusting your eyes to the darkness. There's these rods in our eyes, and if you're going from bright into dark, you're essentially adjusting your eyes. And that may be one of the reasons why he turned the lights out as well.
Oh,
You're going out,
absolutely.
you're going out into the pitch black. And that is something that someone with some kind of military or some kind of training, I think, would think of. So it's almost like every little element that Cooper had a reason, I think.
Well, then what reason was there to pick the name Dan Cooper?
Oh, that's the terrible one. I mean, there's so many ways you can play this. I mean, if you go back to William J. Smith, he had a friend who was killed, who was, I think it was Ira Dan Cooper. Then you've got the comic book. Then you've got the old magazine which links into Vordal. You know, in a dream I had, Ted jumped out of the trucks at Jubit's truck stop, jumped down and just happened to look at the tires because they had a massive word Cooper written on the side of them. But one thing I'd like someone to do is, well, let me just do one thing. I'd like to just like to thank Chris Brower, because he's the man who finds everything. And the little story is that I think I told you this when we spoke before, is very famous rock band because rock and roll is my other passion, called Deep Purple, and I'm sure everybody's heard of Deep Purple. Now, their original singer was a guy called Rod Evans, who literally has disappeared off the planet. And a gentleman wrote a book a few years ago called Chasing Shadows, and he traveled various places trying to find this guy. It's a bit of a sort of a bit of a Forrest Fenn kind of thing. So I sort of semi-jokingly posted on the mystery forum, so apologies, this is not relating to DB Cooper, but this is a mystery that I'm interested in. I think it was 2 days later, Chris was like, I found him for you. So thanks, Chris. And this is a guy who's thousands of people have been trying to find. Never, he never turned up to they had a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 3 or 4 years ago, and I think a lot of the members of Deep Purple turned up. He never turned up, and people have written books trying to find this guy. Chris was like, oh yeah, I found him. He lives in blah de blah. So thanks, Chris. That was just incredible. But
And
one
then
thing I'd
did you
like,
take credit for that? Hey guys,
no, no,
look, I
no,
found him.
no.
Had nothing to do with Chris
My
Brower.
the second rule of Fight Club, my second rule of Fight Club, or second rule of the Vortex is always give credit to whoever does the job. So never take credit.
I do.
And,
I think that's important. I was
yeah,
joking
yeah,
about like
yeah. No,
stealing
no,
credit from Chris,
no, no,
but
no, 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 no.
I always want to give credit to whoever does it, even if like
Mm,
I'm not willing to say their
mm,
name. I'll be like,
mm.
Flyjack deserves the
Yeah,
credit
yeah.
for this find, or Georger, or Ryan Burns or Chris
Mm,
Cunningham found
yeah.
this.
But the reason I bring up Chris is, and I don't know whether he'd be prepared to do this or someone within. You mean there is a chance that Cooper maybe bought a newspaper the day before, or literally in the airport? I mean, I might do this myself actually. I'd love to know what paper was probably the most likely one he read. Let's imagine he was camped out the night before and he wanted something to read. He bought a local newspaper, or he was literally at PDX that day, or because he would have had to arrive at. I mean, the plane took off. It was at two
250, I believe.
2:50. So he would have had to arrive at 2 o'clock. I would have thought maybe slightly later. I don't think he hung around long, but he maybe went and bought a paper. I would like someone to go through, first of all, tell me which paper is probably the most likely that Cooper would have picked up at the airport,
The Oregonian.
the Oregonian, and go through the paper for the day of the hijacking and maybe the day before, and see if there was any articles that about someone called Cooper. Because I can imagine him think, there could be a chance that he sat there, he's just reading the newspaper. Oh God, I really need a name. Oh, there's a story about a guy called James Cooper who did this. Oh, and there's another guy called Dan Smith who did this. Oh, Dan Cooper. So I might do that one day. You just never know. Or there may be an article about someone called Dan Cooper.
That's one of those things in the vortex where I'm like, oh, there's no way. And then it's
Mm,
like, boom, I found this article. It's from
yeah.
November 23rd, 1971. And
Mm,
it's about this guy, this teenage kid, Dan Cooper, who hit 3 home runs.
yeah. Because a lot of people say, obviously names are slightly different in the US than America. Sorry, in the US than the UK. We have, you know, it's and a lot of people in the Vortex will say Dan Cooper is like it's a very obvious name, but for me it isn't. There's no, I don't think there's a lot of Dan Coopers in the UK. I might be wrong, but it's a very American name. But to me, it's not a very obvious name. When people say, "Oh, it's just such an obvious name to pick," I don't think it is. I just don't get that feeling. But you know, we have a lot of Jameses and not a lot of Dans.
Do you think that there is any connection between that name and the comic book?
Do you think Cooper read the comic book? Is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
do you think the name is chosen as an homage to maybe that comic book?
I mean, you could say if you think it's Ted, yeah. I mean, perfect. He was in Belgium. Um, I don't know whether I just don't know. There's so many things that you could tie it to. I just can't answer that one. I mean, like I say, William J. Smith had a friend called Ira Dan Cooper who died. I think he died in some kind of battle or war. And you would think, yeah, I'm going to do it for him, but I just don't know. Yeah, I don't think I can answer that question.
All right, I'm going to force your hand, Tim. DB Cooper is about to come on the show right now and tell us why he chose the name Dan Cooper.
Mhm.
What percentage would you say it's based on the comic book? Or let's say it this way. Would you bet it's based on the comic book, or would you bet it's just a random name? Do you bet it's an homage to the comic or something else? Or do you bet he just chose it at random?
I would say 60-40 comic book. I don't think
Okay.
I don't think I don't think it's a random choice. I think he either saw it, read it, looked at his tires, it had a massive Cooper on it, and then he was walking to the I've got the surname, but I just need a first name. Or, but then I think I read someone said the other day that one of the check-in guys at one of the desks, not the NWO desk, the Northwood Orange, but one of the check-in desks next to it was called Dan Cooper. So maybe he walked past that guy, saw his badge. Oh, there you go. You know, it's
Yeah, but how often is your last name on your employee badge?
yeah, probably not. Probably not. No. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was random. I just don't. I don't know why. I just don't think it was.
I
No.
want it to be some cool homage to the comic
Hmm.
book, and he was a big fan, but
Yeah.
all the other copycats, their names were chosen at random. And a lot of
Mm.
times you talk to an author or something, hey, how'd you come up with the names for these people? I just made them up.
Yeah.
I flipped through a phone book. I saw a couple names. I was watching this one TV show and there was a Tyler in it, so I named him
Yeah.
Tyler.
Yeah. I mean, the copycats. I was listening to a podcast today, and it was talking about the copycat names that they come up with, and I think Martin McNally came up with It's Robert Wilson, isn't it? No particular reason whatsoever. You know. So yeah, I
McCoy
think
was
it's
James Johnson, I believe.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, was there a reason behind that one,
Not that
James
I'm
Johnson?
aware of, although I did
Mm.
have one person email me and find some super military badass that was named James Johnson, but
Oh, right.
McCoy himself was a military badass. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like they would lean more towards a superhero than
Mm.
a colleague.
I mean, that
LeBron
comic is
James wouldn't use Michael Jordan as a fake name.
yeah, that comic is on the nose, as Ryan. I mean, it's a great saying. It is on the nose, and it does work with certain suspects. But do I see Ted sitting around reading a comic that's not in a language that he speaks in either, Belgium, or it got its way over to Vietnam, or it was in a truck stop? I just don't know. I just
See, here's where I am confident that a guy like Braden might have picked up a comic book because you're in a foreign country and there will be a time where you're in a waiting room or you're in a
yeah,
lobby. And this is pre cell phone. You and I are just going to pull out our phones and look at whatever we find most interesting, probably DB Cooper. But he doesn't have that. So now you're in a foreign country in a waiting room and you don't speak French, you don't speak Dutch, whatever the language is where you're at, and there's a stack of magazines in the middle of the
Mhm.
room.
Yeah.
And oh, I can't read this, I can't read that, I'm not interested in that. But oh, a comic book as a 25, 30-year-old guy, I can flip through that
Hmm.
and get an idea of what's going on, even though I don't speak the language.
Yeah. Yeah. You really want it to be you. I get the feeling you really want that comic to be the reason, don't you? I kind of
I
got that.
really do. I really
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And uh, I've been accused of this, like I'm pushing that. I'm not. I'm not at all. I
Mm,
I, I love the idea, and I think it's super exciting.
mm,
Uh, I there's no evidence for it. Do I think he picked the name because of the comic book?
mm,
No, I don't. I have no idea.
yeah.
Do I want him to have picked that name because of the comic book? 1,000,000% yes. Yes, yes,
Mm,
yes.
mm,
Just like the other one,
mm.
Barb Dayton.
Yeah.
If
You
I
want her. Yeah.
if I could pick who DB Cooper was, I'm not
Hmm.
saying who I think DB Cooper was,
Mm,
but I get to pick out of the known suspects.
hmm.
I'm picking Barb Dayton
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that is the most Portland
Mm,
story of all time. It's
yeah.
it's so great, it's so amazing.
I was
Sp-
gonna. I was gonna. Because you know Ryan is mega. He's mega Mr. Photoshop man. And this was
yes, he
long
loves to
before,
play around with that.
yeah, this was, obviously we've only spoken recently. I was going to get him to Photoshop a photograph of Ted Braden with his arms around McCoy. And they go, there we go, we've solved it.
Oh, and by the way, Barb Dayton took the picture.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I actually got Ryan I wanted to get Drew a present, and I found a t-shirt which was, um, it was a picture of a hockey guy called Braden. And basically, I turned it into, you've heard of the band Iron Maiden, right?
Oh,
So, I,
absolutely.
so I've got this T-shirt, this picture of this T-shirt. It's Iron Braden with Ted's face in the middle of it. So we're all gonna get those out, made up. But yeah, no, Ryan's incredible with Photoshop. I mean, the man's a genius.
Don't give him too much credit. It goes to his head. Uh, Tim, what do you think of the fact that they released two different sketches within almost a year of each other, and they look wildly different?
Yeah, if you'd have said this to me just over a year ago, I would have said I love Sketch B. For now, I prefer Sketch A. I mean, Sketch B looks like William J. Smith.
It
Yeah,
the aged photo of Cooper. I want to
yeah.
say that is that from Unsolved Mysteries, that aged photo of him.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but I
But
mean,
man, William J. Smith compared to that aged photo, it's so close. It's so dead on. But
mm,
I made this joke on the show a long time ago. I was like, if you just pull up a picture of your grandpa, it
yeah,
looks like one of those two sketches. And I got an email from someone with a picture of their grandpa attached. And they're
mm,
like, hey, love your show. Just listened. Heard you say that thing about your grandpa. Here's a picture of my grandpa. 100%
mm.
not Cooper. Looks exactly like Sketch A.
I mean, if you want someone who looks like Cooper, I think his name's is it Jerry? Is it Jerry Alter? The guy who stole there was a guy who stole painting.
I
I'm not,
believe it is Jerry. Jerry and Rita, I think.
yeah, something like that. I mean, there's also Don Burnworth who looks a lot like
Don
a
Burnsworth looks so
Burnsworth. Yeah,
close.
I am a Sketches man in the sense that I think they're if you get Sketch A, I mean I've got a T-shirt on with Sketch A on. If you get Sketch A and you literally put it in a vice and squash it, it becomes Sketch B. Seriously. It's the face is the elongated version of A. The B is a sort of a more of a squashed face. But yeah, I think I think the 302s have recently, if you actually sort of analyze them, it does seem to indicate, and I think it was a comment Flo made. It does seem to indicate that probably A. I mean, my favorite one is A, but it has to have the sunglasses on because apparently those eyes were like from a were eyes from an identity. Is it called an identikit? I think something like that. So the eyes, the facial features were drawn, and then the eyes were taken from something. But I mean, A with sunglasses to me is the best representation, but I don't agree with the nose. Although the stewardesses all said that the nose worked, and then you've got to think, well, then the stewardesses really liked Murphy, who was the hoaxer, whose nose is not thin and who doesn't have a lower, a large lower lip. So it's all over the place. It really is.
It
It's
really
all
is all
over.
over the place when you
Yeah,
start
yeah, yeah.
basing suspects on looks.
But I do think that it has to be in the right ballpark. The slightly receding hairline, the slight curl in the hair. I mean, I've received information recently that 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 Cooper was a skinny chap. You know, don't want to go into too much detail, but yes, Cooper was skinny, which ties in perfectly for me. Thank you very much. And he was definitely early 40s, which ties in with me. Thank you very much. So, but yeah, I mean, I think the sketches, and then you've got the vampire Count Chocula sketch,
I,
which
I I hate that one.
I like it. And
It's it
yeah,
just bugs me that he looks crazy and
yeah,
angry
yeah,
when the stewardesses immediately after the hijacking, Tina in the
mm,
press conference is like, he was polite, he was
mhm,
never unkind, he was
yeah,
friendly, he got annoyed at one point, but
yeah,
was never cruel or hostile to me. I
yeah,
paraphrased that, so forgive me, but that's
yeah.
basically what she said.
I mean, I don't like speaking on behalf of the stewardesses or the pilots. But I do get the feeling that Flo was really. I'm not saying Tina wasn't affected, and I'm sorry, Tina, if you do listen to this. I'm not saying that you weren't affected. I'm not Alice. I'm not saying you weren't affected, and I'm not saying the pilots weren't affected. But it seems Flo was really freaked out. You know, um, and you've spoken to various people about the fact that with the height issue is people will exaggerate this, they'll make you look more angry if you're scared. I think there's a certain element of that in there. I just like there's it works for a couple of suspects actually. Lauren Hall's got a what do they call it, a widow's peak. It works for a couple. I mean, that widow's peak is very extreme, but I do think Cooper, looking and analyzing hairdos as you do when you're in the vortex, which you thought you'd never do in your lifetime. Um, if you've got that kind of receding element, which I do, it creates a widow's peak. So I do think there is a certain element in that, but you don't see that in the other drawings.
All right, I know you've moved on from William J. Smith, but what are your thoughts on the Gunther book?
Um,
I assume you've read it.
yes, I haven't read
Okay.
it cover to cover because I don't know if you you asked me for a bit of my life story, and I said to you, I've only read 3 books from cover to cover in my 50 years on this planet. And I used to be the managing editor of a business magazine, so I should be a reader. But I've only ever read 3 books. But I've read the majority of it, and it's very intriguing. And there's more to it. Working with Dave, there is more to this story. There's not just the book. There's letters, there's adverts in newspapers which tie in perfectly with certain things. And it does make you think. And the more coincidences you get, the more coincidences I got, the more pieces I put into the puzzle. I don't I do struggle, and a lot of people struggle with this whole story of a man landing, I think it's breaking his ankle, twisting his ankle, then a lady finding him and falling in love. I don't think that. I always looked at it as an analogy, a kind of as possibly Cooper was telling the story but elaborating falsely, because you're never going to tell the precise story anyway, because you'll end up finding that person.
Right.
I I did struggle with the the one that I always struggled with was the captain coming back, because that is in the Ha 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 book as well. That exact captain coming back was it Captain Scott who came back?
You've read
Whatever.
Ha Ha Ha?
I have read Ha. Well, I've read, yeah. Again, it's one of those books that I struggled with a little bit. I found it quite boring. It wasn't really Cooper related, but
Did
the
you buy
one
it
what
or read it online?
I a lovely guy called Alan sent it to me from America. And I think you know Alan, don't you? And yeah, I read it. I read what I needed to of it. Um, because I've got a brain that you had a lovely lady on one of your podcasts who never reads books because her brain fires too quickly, and by the time you've read one page you kind of haven't really read it. Well, that's kind of me. That's why I love podcasts and I love audiobooks. But yeah, it's just strange that those two instances happened in two separate books. So that makes me think that someone saw that made that up somewhere else, and two people read that same article or something. I don't know. That was weird that it was in those two books. Those two wrong accounts of it. And the parachute color was completely wrong, but then you would say maybe Cooper would disguise that. There's something strange about that book. I will say that out of all of the books in the vortex, there is definitely something odd about it. And if you really go into that world and you look at some of these new, the newspaper articles that Cooper, the adverts that Cooper asked to be put in certain newspapers and magazines, there's other ones as well which tie into to names that tie into family members of this. But ultimately, I have to dismiss that because of the information I've got with relating to the suspect that was connected to that. Does that make sense?
It does make sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the thing about the Gunther book is there's things in there that didn't come out for decades later.
Yeah.
Like I think the Gunther book is like 1985-ish. Don't quote me on that,
Mm.
but it's around
Yeah.
there.
Hmm.
And the idea that he says Cooper's involved in industrial chemicals
Yeah.
in 1985 when we don't know anything about what was on the tie.
Mm.
And there are so few industries where you could say that tie came from this industry. If
Mm.
if Max Gunther said Cooper was an electrician, Cooper
Mm.
was a banker, Cooper was a beer salesman,
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense at all.
No.
But he says Cooper was in industrial chemicals.
And it essentially has a link to the Elsinore ghost, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Mm. Which is odd.
Which is real odd. And then the more you look at Lyle Cameron, the weirder that gets.
Mm. I mean, I have theories about that, and they start with C and end with A. But
And there's only one letter
there's
missing.
one letter in the middle, yeah. Um, you know, you could go down the complete conspiracy route and say, listen, I mean, I don't believe this for a second, but let's imagine it was Ted Braden. You could go down the CIA is a very powerful organization. I know powerful organizations. I work with a lot of my world is technology, and I work with a lot of my world is Russia. I work with a lot of people in the former Soviet Union, and I know powerful organizations. And the CIA is a very powerful organization and could essentially do whatever it wants to a certain degree. I think. Let's this isn't what happened, but you could say they knew it was Ted. So let's just, let's start feeding false information. Let's get some guy to write. We'll pay him to write a book that's got some information that may be true. I don't think that's what happened, but there's definitely something weird about that book. I will say that I wouldn't be surprised if there is a link to Cooper in some way. I just don't know how to link it. But
I'm with you 100%. There's something mysterious about that book.
yeah,
I don't think that book is the way the case gets solved,
no, no,
but I think it's another mystery surrounding Cooper that's not related to him.
yeah.
It like I feel like Tina Bar. If I brought Cooper in this room right now and we could interview him and we
Mm-hmm.
said, "How did the money get to Tina Bar?" He would say, "I don't know."
I disagree. But I think he knows exactly how it got there. I don't think he buried it, but I think he knows how it got there. But anyway, but do you? I can't remember. Do you believe it was? But do you think it might have been Barb? Oh, I can't remember what you said.
That was the author of the
Clara.
Gunther letters, or was she was Cooper?
Clara. She was Clara. No, no, she was Clara.
I'm leaning towards Barb being Clara. The only thing that throws me off is those letters were postmarked New York.
York, yeah, which
And
works with.
yeah, Barb's a pilot, but she's a pilot of a small aircraft that maybe had a
Mm.
150, 200-mile range. I don't know that off the top of my head. I'm not an expert in aviation
See
at
that
all.
that that's the thing. It works with Smith. New York works.
Yeah.
But the one thing I always struggled with was that it was Max Gunther. There was Max Gunther that came up with the name Dan Leclerc. I think we think. I mean, I haven't really delved. I didn't really delve into the. There's a lot more to this story than just the book. There's letters and there's things like that. I didn't really mega delve into that element of it. So maybe Clara did come up with that name, but the fact that he came up with that name, and then there was someone called Dan Clare who then links to that. You know, was that a step too far to try and connect those? I don't know. But there is a heck of a lot of coincidence in this case. I've never seen anything like the amount of coincidences in this case. So my Tina Bar theory is probably rubbish, but there just is a heck of a lot of them. And you can any suspect that you're into, you can find 1,000 coincidences.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
Why do you think this case is still unsolved?
begins with C and ends in A. No, no. I think it's partly because I think he was the first. Um, I think that gave him a lot of advantages. I think Cooper was trained. I think, whether it was Ted Braden or not, it was definitely someone with some kind of training. I think he knew what he was doing. He knew it was going to be a nighttime jump. He knew the weather was going to be exactly what he needed when he got on the ground. Um, I think he made it as difficult as possible to solve, but you could go down a conspiracy route. That's all I'll say.
Well, what's that route? No, I'm curious.
Well, going back to what I was saying, I mean, I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility that Cooper was protected.
I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility either.
Mm.
And if there is a suspect that is being protected, goddamn, it's Braden.
Or Skip Hall.
Or yeah, that's true. Skip Hall, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm more inclined to think that Cooper was something along those lines than I am that he was Vince Peterson. And there's no disrespect to Eric. I mean, I'm not a suspect killer. I joke with people and I get a bit tetchy. Why do I get tetchy when people diss my suspects? I don't know. Because you do get invested into your suspects. You do. You admire them might not be the right word. But the thing about Ted was that he had a heck of a life.
Oh, yeah.
His life was tough. And I'm not just talking about the wartime, I'm going back to the family life as well. And I didn't have the best upbringing in the world. I mean, in the sense that, my mum and dad separated quite early. And I think there was a nice guy in there. And I'm talking about Ted rather than Cooper. There's an amazing photograph. It's one of my favorite pictures of Ted, and it's him and a friend standing beside each other. And I think this is in Belgium or maybe it's Scotland or something. And Drew will pick me up on this. And it's him and his friend standing there, and I think they've just done a jump. And Ted came second, and this guy came first. And Ted has got a massive smile on his face, as if to say, "Well done, mate." Now that's a good guy, in my view. And there's been a few times when it's kind of Ted comes second a few times. There's a recent photograph where he came second in this, came first in a lot of things, but he came second in this. And I almost get the feeling like he just let them win. I think, although this is really sad, I think there was a nice guy in there, and I know he liked ladies, and I'm not saying he was great with his family, but I'm not saying he wasn't great. It's not my place to comment. But he liked the ladies, and he was respectful of ladies, and you know all about the standing up and the way and the way he lambasted a gentleman for not standing up when a lady walked in the room. So I do get a little bit upset sometimes when people diss my suspect. So therefore, I try not my best not to diss anyone else's suspect. But but going back to what I was saying is I don't think it was someone like Vince Peterson because I think the guy had some training. That's just me.
What do you think it will take to solve this case?
DNA. That's
That's
it.
the only way it gets solved?
Yeah.
What if I found a 20 and a ticket stub in my attic?
Who would you link that to? Your
Uh,
granddad. Your granddad.
the previous owner of my house,
Yeah. Yeah. I don't honestly
start
think
looking
that.
him up
Yeah.
and
Yeah. 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 I don't think you'll ever. I don't think we're ever going to find a 2020. I don't think we're ever going to find a parachute. What's so frustrating is you've got a Cooper parachute. We've got one. We've got a parachute which Cooper put his hand inside in a museum, cut the shroud lines. So it's just, I mean, going back to what you were saying about Larry wanting to solve this case. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But now we've got a lot of people saying, well, this is what, if I was Larry, I would have done this and I would have got the shoot out of here and I would have swabbed this and I would have done that. And we all know better. We all think we know better. But I would love that is a possibility if they could get that shoot out of the museum, stick a swab inside the packing card hole because he definitely put his hand in that. So yeah, I just have this feeling that it's not going to be solved. I don't know why, but I'm really looking. I'm keeping my eye out on the tie. I'm keeping my eye out on the DNA. And all good for people who are involved in that.
give me a percentage on the case getting solved.
20%.
There's a 20% chance this thing gets solved. Okay.
Even though I just said it won't be solved, you know. But if you were to ask me at some point in the future, will there be an indication of who Cooper was? I would give that a lot higher. So what I'm saying is I don't know whether there'll ever be a situation where we can say it was definitely Vince Peterson, it was definitely McCoy, or it was definitely Milton Vordal. But I think there will be an indication of the kind of man Cooper was in the not too distant future.
What do you think happens to the vortex when the case gets solved? And of course, that definitely depends on how it gets solved.
I'm on to the Maura Murray case. As soon as Cooper's done, that's the other case that I need to solve. We all have these cases that we need to solve, but once Cooper's the day you phone me up and say, Tim, it was Brad Jenkins. Brilliant, fantastic, thanks, bye. And then I'm on to I hope we talk again, but that would be I'm not gonna then go, well, I don't think it was him because that DNA could be contaminated. The only thing I want is to see Cooper's face. That's all I want.
See,
I know it's
I would rather know the story than see his face.
really
Yeah, so
no.
I'm giving you this choice.
Mm,
I can give you Cooper's name, but
hmm.
you don't get to know any more details about him. When you
Yeah.
look him up, there's essentially no history. He died in
Yeah.
1989,
Hmm.
lived an uninteresting life. There's no information about the jump, no
Hmm.
motive, no blah, 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 but it's
Hmm.
100% him.
Do I get to see him?
Yeah, there's a picture of him.
Brilliant. Okay.
Or I can tell you everything about the story from his motive to what he did on the plane to how he jumped to what happened when he put his boots on the ground,
Hmm.
but no name. Which do you pick?
First one.
See, oh, you're totally wrong, Tim. You're totally wrong. I want to know the story.
Right. But I suppose if an intellectual, which I'm not, would have answered the second one because you would be able to find out who it was from that information.
Well, in
If you
this
gave me,
scenario, you'll never find out who it was.
oh, definitely number one then. Definitely number one. I just want to see him. I just want to see his face because I have dreamt about him. I'm sure not in a weird way, but he's come into my dreams. I'm sure people in the vortex have probably dreamt. People who do dream. I don't dream very often, funny enough, but occasionally. I have remote viewed 3 times, and I just want to see his face. And I saw his face, but that's another story.
All right, I got an extra seat in my time machine. Of course,
Hmm.
you and I were going to November 24th, 1971.
Hmm.
We board the plane. Do you stop the hijacking before it starts, or do you go along for the ride?
If you'd have asked me that before I had children, and after now I've got children, two different answers. So, you know, if I was a man without children, I would have gone along for the ride. But if because I've got kids, I would stop it or try to stop it. Because your focus changes in life. I was a rock and roll star. I was doing all the things that rock and roll stars do, and I'm not saying I don't mean that in the sense of was famous or anything, but that was my lifestyle. I was touring and recording and you know
Sex,
backstage.
drugs, and rock and roll.
No comment. Uh, but that was my life. But now I'm not. I'm a father, and my situation with my son. It's a completely different situation. So the answer to that question is completely different between then and now. But as of now, I would try to stop it. But if it was Ted Braden, I wouldn't. But if it was, now, which one of the suspects do I think I could take out? Who's
Kenny
the weakest?
Christensen.
He's a big guy, isn't he?
No, Kenny Christensen's not a big guy, and I
Oh, I
don't
thought
think Kenny Christensen would be down for a fight.
no. Yeah, I would stop it. If a 50-year-old Tim, I would stop it. A 25-year-old Tim, I'd go along for the ride. I'd probably jump out with him, actually, to be honest.
Why do you think so many people have confessed to this crime?
It's seen as a crime that didn't really affect anyone in a majorly traumatic way. It's seen the Americana of it, um, the zeitgeist of it, I suppose. It's seen as a crime where no one was killed, so you're not going to admit to being the Zodiac unless you're a complete lunatic. You would probably admit to being DB Cooper because you jumped out of the back of a 727. But then if you actually go into the case, you were a guy who sat there with a potential bomb, probably a gun, and scared 3 young ladies. Like I said, you wouldn't admit to being the Zodiac, where you probably would be more likely to admit to being DB Cooper. But when you immerse yourself into the case, I think you'd probably be less likely to admit to being DB Cooper because you get to learn all the little intricacies of what he did and the stresses and strains on certain people. But yeah, I think it's seen as a cool crime. I can understand why people confess.
What do you think was was Cooper's state of mind, or even his mental health at the time of the hijacking?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have a particular area of expertise, but mental health is something that I have, I'm involved with. I have I have it myself. I have bipolar. I mean, but I don't. I think I don't know. This is one of the things that I have really, really thought about for a long time. There are elements of the things that he did which scream out things like bipolar. A sort of change in character. They call it rapid cycling in the sense that your mood changes quite drastically. But then I think no, a lot. His anger at the fact that the fuel took such a long time. His frustration. I don't know whether there was any extremes in his behavior. He seemed to. I mean, I get the impression that the majority of it was calm. You had a few little bouts of anger and some joviality, some like some loveliness to him, which is really strange. But yeah, I don't know the answer to that mental health. I'd love to know. That's one thing I would love to know the answer. I'd love Ryan to do a live and get you know, I don't know whether people would admit to their, whether they've got ADHD or autism or, there obviously there's some extremes where people wouldn't be involved in it, but bipolar, and we all sit around and we say, would you feel that? Would you feel that way if that happened to you? I mean, specifically with bipolar, is you have I said earlier, you have a phase called mania, which essentially everything is fantastic, nothing can go wrong. I could jump out of a plane, but I mean, I'm scared of flying. So maybe Cooper was in some kind of manic situation, but then he wouldn't be calm and there was no sweating or anything like that. So I look at the little trivial things, no sweating, calmness, um, and then how do you tie that into certain mental health disorders? I just if I was going to guess, I would say he had PTSD. Like we spoke earlier about, he was almost certainly a military man. I think, and a lot of military men saw just reading Braden's book or various other books. They saw a heck of a lot,
Oh
and
yeah.
maybe that was the grudge. Maybe it was like, oh, you've put me through hell, and this is the way I'm repaying you.
You touched on this a couple of minutes ago, and normally I would roll my eyes at this,
Hmm.
but one of the people I respect most in the DB Cooper world also considers this a potentially useful tool.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on remote viewing?
I've actually well, not spoken. I've had a couple of emails with Bruce recently, and which is a real honor. So, Bruce, thank you for responding to my email.
Bruce is the man. Absolutely love
He,
him.
he's, he is. He's not just the mayor of Cooperville. He's the godfather of Cooperville.
He is.
He he hasn't responded to. I mean, he said to me, "Why do you feel the way about remote viewing that you do?" But he hasn't responded. So either he's taken offense, and if I didn't mean offense, but I think it's scientific. A lot of people put remote viewing as being a spiritual thing, astral plane, that kind of thing. And maybe it is. That's not my thing. I'm not of that inclination. I've worked in the science world for a long time. I've met some incredible scientists, and one gentleman that I worked with on science used to talk about remote viewing, and he was a member of a Russian organization. Funnily enough, they got three letters again. Turned scientist, and he would talk about remote viewing, and obviously I never even thought about it for years and years and years and years. And then when I was going through the phase of coming out of the Smith world, being depressed, I thought, well, I'm gonna read up on remote viewing for other reasons, another case that I'm interested in. I thought, and the guy said to me, there's a scientific. I mean, I'll explain what I mean by that is that we are all made of energy and water and atoms. We are an electrical component, and everything is made up of atoms. So this table that I'm touching now, and it always used to, I'm used as a kid, I don't believe it. Everything is moving, everything is vibrating. So we are essentially a big ball of energy. So I don't see it as being impossible to project it's very difficult for me to explain this, but to essentially go to a different place because everything is the same. Do you know what I mean? Does that probably doesn't make any sense, but
It makes sense. I understand what you're saying.
yeah, everything is essentially connected. We are all made of atoms, and everything is, in my view, is connected. And I think maybe that's why a spiritual thing has occurred because sometimes the connection, a connection. I mean, I've made some incredible friends miles away that were meant to be my friends because of certain reasons. Do you know? I don't know if that's ever happened to you. Has it ever happened to you
Oh,
whether you've
a
met?
million percent. I'm talking to you right
Yeah.
now, Tim.
Well, but I'm sure you've met people in your life that you were meant to meet because they solved a problem. And that's what I mean by connection. There's a scientific element of it. I don't look at that as in any kind of religion. I respect people with faith. I grew up in the faith. But I look at it as a scientific view, and I think there is a certain element of a connection between everyone. That's the only way I can explain it. So I don't see any reason why you couldn't travel to a certain place and time. And I know for a fact that some of the biggest organizations in the world, which all seem to have three letters, funny enough, use it. And why do all these organizations have three letters? Do you have any ideas? But I know they use it. The other thing is the other theory that I believe in is a bit of a strange one. It's called the stone tape theory. Now,
Did you say the stoned ape theory?
no, stone tape,
Oh, stone tape.
stone
Okay.
tape. Yeah. So and this, I'm going to ask you some silly questions. You believe that cassette tapes exist, right?
I do
You've
believe cassette
right.
tapes exist.
Now, do you believe that you can get sound onto physical? A cassette tape is a physical thing, right?
Yes?
I always used to think to myself, how do you get pictures onto a videotape? How do you get a videotape is a strip of I don't even know what it is, but you can get vision and sound onto physical things, right? So the stone tape theory is, which a lot of ghost hunters like to use, is that events and sounds and things get imprinted onto physical things. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
Yeah. So you get lots of stories in the UK about people will be driving through the countryside and they'll see an army of people from the Middle Ages walking through a field. I mean, it's like, and you'll laugh at that, but so many stories of people who see things that happened long time ago. And my theory on that is it's almost like it's been recorded into the ether. So I don't believe in ghosts in that sense. So that's my remote theory, and I'm not and I absolutely respect Bruce's theory on it, and I absolutely respect people who think it's complete nonsense. But that's my theory on it. I think there is a scientific element to it. So I thought I'd try it. I just thought I'd try it, and there's a couple of different ways of doing it, and one of the Bruce was talking about a time. I think he actually spoke to Braden. I think, funnily enough. And he was saying that when he did it, he came out of it and he was physically exhausted and shaken. And that's exactly what happened to me. So whether I believe it's true, maybe I just had a bad dream, maybe it's all a load of rubbish, but I was quite shaken by what I saw in the first one.
What'd you see?
I saw Ted Braden. And bear in mind, I was a William J. Smith was DB Cooper for me. This is what scared me was William J. Smith was DB Cooper. And I projectors sounds so spooky, but I was on that plane and there's a certain routine that you have to do, but you have to be in a very calm state. You have to be awake, obviously. But yeah, I tried it. I mean, I just thought, why not? You got to try everything once. And yeah, I was on that plane, but he would never turn around. So I constantly had his back to me. And the only way I can explain it is like it's like you're watching a television. It's very, very visual, very like you're part of that thing. But everything's at a slightly strange angle. And but I saw Flo as clear as day. But Cooper would just never turn he would never turn his face to me. And then this went on for 15 minutes. And then he turned his face to me, and for a split second, and it was Ted Braden. And I woke up and I was like, "Oh my God." I was like, it scared me to death because he wasn't Cooper. As far as I was concerned, I had no interest in Ted Braden whatsoever. But the thing that scares me now is that it's well, not scares me. The thing that interests me now is that in that remote viewing, the overseat light on row 18 was on, and that has now been revealed as being a fact. Coincidences, probably. Rubbish, yeah, more than likely. But I just find it interesting, you know.
That is pretty interesting. I also like the fact that he wouldn't turn and look at you,
Yeah. He turned and
which
looked at
seems
me.
like that's what Braden
Yeah.
would do.
He turned and looked at me and he smirked. Now, there's been some information, people that knew Ted said his smirking was his thing. I mean, I don't want to sound like some kind of kook on here, I really don't. But it's just it was an interesting project. I just thought I'd try it because there's a gentleman called John, I think his name's John McConicle or something along those lines. And there's a very famous story that he found through remote viewing a Russian submarine, and he knew exactly where it was and exactly how big it was, the dimensions of it, and everything. And then it turned out that whatever he saw was absolutely the way it was. So, you know, there's definitely got to be something to this, but I understand if you think it's complete rubbish.
Speaking of speculation,
Hmm.
what do you think Cooper liked to listen to? What music was Cooper rocking out to?
Yeah, yeah. There's not enough rock and roll analogies. I thought I'd be a few more, but 1971. I mean, in Vietnam, where let's imagine it was Ted, just hypothetically, what would they be listening to? I mean, the Doors were around, weren't they? The Doors?
Creedence Clearwater Revival?
Yeah. I mean, I know the Kinks released an album on the very day that Norjack happened. So you obviously wouldn't be listening to that one beforehand, but a 40 middle-aged man would probably be slightly hard rock, I think, maybe. And that was, I mean, there was some incredible bands back then. Yeah. So I just don't know. I just don't know. I don't see him as being if he's the type of man I think he was, I don't see him being like a jazz or a classical.
All right. Would you rather know the story of what happened after Cooper touched the ground
Right.
or what music he was listening to the month before and after?
Oh, the story of what happened. Music, yeah. Don't. It's one of those things that because when you're a musician, and then when you put yourself into a different kind of hobby, you think, I wonder what he was listening to. I wonder if he was pumping himself up, the night before, in the mirror, listening to, well, I don't know. Don't think Led Zeppelin were out at 71, were they? Oh yeah, they were. Yeah, they were. Yeah, my mind's gone completely blank. I'm so focused on the Cooper story that my main hobby for the whole of my life has gone out the window, and I can't remember any bands. But I'm
All
thinking Led
right. Well,
Zeppelin.
before I get you off Cooper, then let's keep on track.
Hmm.
I have several friends that are in true crime podcasting that do a true crime podcast.
Yeah.
Male podcasters that do a true crime podcast.
Hmm.
And their audience is over 75% female.
Yeah.
And my audience is well over 90% male.
Hmm.
I would say this is true crime, wouldn't you?
No,
You
I
wouldn't
would
say Cooper is true crime.
no. I mean I've got a theory. I think I've had this theory for this question, and I think one of your podcasters probably about two or three ago came up with the same theory as me, so I was a bit gutted. But I think there is no doubt in my mind, and anyone who disagrees, I don't agree with them, that men and women feel differently about their children. They a man's it's just the way we are. We don't love them anymore. We don't love them any less. We just feel differently about them. And I think a child was inside the mother. I mean, there's a bonding between a mother and a child that a father will never have, and that's not more or less or more important or less important. It's just different. But I think women like to know what's going on in the world. They need to protect. And I'm not saying fathers don't protect their children, but traditionally, a woman needs to know all the dangers that's going on because traditionally back in the modern world is different, but traditionally the mother was the one who stayed home and looked after the children, and the father went out and was the breadwinner. I'm not saying I agree with that, but that's just the way it was traditionally. and in nature as well, the female generally was the one, or is the one, who kind of roosts the chick, and the father goes out. And although that's not always the case, lions, the females are more important than the males, a lot more important. But I think that with true crime, obviously a lot of true crime is murders and really nasty things. And I think ladies like to know all the dangers that are out there. And I think as you watch programs with that kind of thing, you think, well, now I know what to do if that happened to me, or you know, do you know what I'm saying? Do you know that it's getting in all that information that kind of you get through watching it's a horrible thing to say, but watching murder programs about murders and stuff, is you learn more information about what to do if you're ever in that situation. I think that appeals more to females. I hope I'm not sounding completely sexist here,
No, and it's a
but
tough question to answer
yeah,
because as soon
it
as you
is.
start
Yeah,
speculating, then you're
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I'm trying not to be
yeah,
sexist,
yeah.
but these are my
No,
thoughts. Yeah, yeah.
no, absolutely not. But Cooper is, and I can understand on the other side of the coin why Cooper is a male orientated thing, because it is a guy in a suit who jumped out of a plane, got loads of money,
And a
and sat
pretty
next.
girl is lighting a
Yeah,
cigarette for
exactly,
him.
exactly. But I'll tell you what, some of the best minds that I've been dealing with have been ladies, and we think differently about it. We do. Maybe it's a good thing to stand away and not admire him as much as maybe some of the men do. But I do, going back to what I said, I think most of us within the Cooper case who've been in it for any period of time, we like the case, but we don't admire the man for what he did. Maybe the jumping out of the plane bit of it, but the scaring people, we don't admire him for
Right.
it.
The daredevil part is awesome.
Yeah,
The threatening to kill people with a bomb part, not so great.
exactly, exactly. No, yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer. That very difficult, and
I,
I've heard you ask it 74 times.
I
I think.
just got an email today from a gal who wanted to know why I asked that question.
Mm,
And and I sent her an email back. I was like, "Hey, the reason I'm curious about this is that, most true crime podcasts are dominated by a female audience, and I would
mm,
consider this a true crime podcast.
mm,
And not only is it not 50-50,
mm,
it's not even 75-25. It's
mm.
90% at least, 90% at least male.
I mean, in the definition of the word true crime, it is a true crime. It's a crime that really happened.
Yeah.
But there's just something about this case. You know, the people within this case are different from the people within. But I mean, I'm sure if you went into the Zodiac world, they would say the same thing about them. But
And there is some crossover. I know like Chris Cunningham is very
mm,
interested in the Zodiac Killer,
yeah,
Drew Beeson as well. And I feel like there's more crossover with DB Cooper and like conspiracy, Bigfoot, that kind of stuff than
yeah,
there would be Cooper and this missing child or this unsolved
mm,
murder case.
yeah. Well, you've watched Bigfoot versus, was it Bigfoot versus TV Cooper?
Versus DB Cooper. Have you seen
Oh,
it?
no, no, I don't want
I
to.
I would highly recommend it. It's very short.
Oh,
It can't be more than 90 minutes. I would probably say it's 75 minutes. And if you, Tim, really love watching jacked shirtless men work out, it will be
mhm.
one of your favorite movies of all time.
It's not my favorite subject,
It contains very little of Bigfoot or DB Cooper.
but you preferred it to I Am DB Cooper, right?
Yeah, is that's the more recent one with the young guy and Rodney?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I heard
that
about.
one, that's probably the only project that I won't promote.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I listened to. No, I think it might be the live that you did with Ryan. I think. Yeah, you weren't a fan of that movie.
No, I was disgusted by it. There's a scene in
Mm.
there where they trespass on Tina Barr, get caught, and then leave it in the movie. Like, are you
Wow.
trying to encourage other people to do this?
What, the real Tina Bar?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. It's
Oh.
and also the idea that they're going to investigate Rodney.
Mm,
Just for everyone listening, do not watch this terrible movie.
mm.
I cannot I cannot say enough bad stuff about it.
But I
But the
watched
idea that you have these bounty hunters or whoever they are get a confession from this guy and then they want to investigate him as Cooper, how
mm,
about look at the Wikipedia page?
mm.
That's all the research you would need to do to know that Rodney would be younger than Tina.
He was 19, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. There hasn't been a decent DB Cooper movie. I must admit, I watched is it called The Pursuit of DB Cooper, which is the Treat Williams film. I was expecting something sort of, I'm not, it's a horrible thing to say. I was expecting something sort of half decent. I mean, it was completely all over the place. I watched it
it's
about
it has
6 months ago.
nothing to do with DB Cooper. I mean, the only thing that has to do is he jumps out of a plane in the beginning,
Yeah, yeah,
and then the story is about him being on the run
yeah.
with some gal. Isn't it Sally
Mm.
Field?
It's Treat Williams as the guy. I'm not sure. I can't remember, but
I can't remember
whoever,
who the gal is, but
he
yeah,
was quite, yeah,
even then, he jumps out of the plane during the daytime.
yeah,
Why do you always do that? Why do you always make
yeah,
it daytime?
yeah. That was a good scene, though. I have to be honest. That was quite good. That was quite fun watching someone jump out. But the
I
fact that she,
actually really liked the Marvel Loki scene.
yeah,
It's like 25 seconds long,
yeah, yeah.
but
If,
and again, he jumps in the daytime. But the
but,
scene with him on the plane, I thought was really
mm,
good.
but why do they always get one element wrong? I mean, I watched the HBO documentary a couple of days ago. I mean, it's a British document. It was a guy from the BBC, I think it was. I think it's probably the best DB Cooper doc. But he's on the wrong side of the plane.
I can't
It's
remember
like
that guy's name. John Bowers? John,
I'm not sure.
gosh, I can't remember his
It's
name.
it's always. I mean, I always feel at home when I hear an English voice on a documentary.
Why is it
But
that an English voice belongs in a documentary?
well, it shouldn't really. I mean,
Because I always expect, if I'm watching a nature documentary or something, I expect a British voice.
hmm, I mean, we've got this famous journalist called Louis Theroux, who I'm sure you've probably heard of, who does a lot of his stuff in America, and it's we're really into sort of English people going over to other countries, especially America, and interviewing.
John Dower was the filmmaker
John Dow, that's it, yeah. But
of that DB Cooper doc.
there is another documentary which I'm finding really difficult to find, and it's another English guy, and I'm sure there's a scene in it where he goes into a 727 and he's sitting next to a guy. I can't remember. If anybody out there remind me what that documentary is. There's another one with an English guy in it, but I can't remember what that's called. But no, go back to the movies. I mean, obviously, um, no, I've not seen Bigfoot. I, I mean, when you said what it was about, I was thinking that because on the picture on the cover is a picture of DB Cooper and Bigfoot. So I'm thinking it's going to be DB Cooper jumping into the woods and he's going to have to escape Bigfoot. But apparently it's not really anything to do with that at all. It's like,
No, it's about a bunch of hot guys get a cabin in the woods together, and then
like
Cooper happens
you
to
can,
be in the woods where they're at, and then knocks on their door. It's I I struggle to explain a plot because I'm not sure I understood
mm,
the
mm,
plot in the movie. I've
mm,
seen it, let's go 1.5 times because I watched it all the way through once. And then
mm,
people will send me clips or hey, there's this one podcast and they reviewed this
mm,
movie. You got to check it out. So I've seen bits and pieces of it.
mm,
It's pretty wild. If you want to laugh, I would recommend it.
mm,
It's not going to bring us any closer to solving the
yeah,
case. If you love half naked,
no,
shirtless guys in great shape, then it's a
mm.
great movie.
Okay. So there has yet to be a decent DB Cooper movie. Right, okay.
Well, you've got that Nod If You Understand,
Mm,
hopefully should be coming out at some point in the future, and then the Rob Bertrand from the Northwest Escape Experience. I hope I got that part right. Uh, he wrote a script about DB Cooper
All right.
that was absolutely fantastic, and
Hmm.
it's essentially the 5 hours from getting on the plane to jumping out,
Right.
which is what I loved.
Mm.
It was that story, and it basically ended with him jumping out of the plane.
Wow, that's cool.
And boy, would I love to see that movie made.
And no suspect particular, just
No suspect in
no suspect.
particular. It was
Yep.
just this is what happened in the hijacking.
Because for me, it's that last half an hour that I'd love to know what happened. I mean, there's you've heard of the Kofelt grift, right? Which is where Flo was sort of taken, conned. I assume you know that. And
Yeah,
she was she was offered money to. I think they were going to make maybe they were going to make a movie or something. They were going to do something, but there's some pieces of information in what she said to those gentlemen, which my question to people is even though it turned out to be a grift, would she lie?
yeah.
She didn't know whether she thought this was legitimate. So, she saw him wearing gloves. She saw him changing his shoes. He hit her with the toilet door as he was coming out. I mean, that doesn't sound like stuff that she would just make up for no reason. I mean, I've hypothesized about what he sounds horrible, what he did in the toilet for those between 1 and 4 minutes. I've heard people say it was 1 minute, and then I've heard someone say no, it was 4 minutes. If it was 1 minute, it was a wee. If it was 4 minutes, then it could have been any number of things. But I hypothesized that she said she saw him with gloves on, and I was wondering whether he may have been wearing like latex gloves, because there was a thing that came up about if the bomb was real, that there are some pretty heavy chemicals involved. And I'm wondering whether he was dismantling it in the toilet. Maybe it was real, and he'd sat down with Tina, and you know, he'd got, because the money was either coming on or was on, and that was that task done. So therefore, because Ryan always says that once that sort of element of the money was on and everyone was off, the bomb was never mentioned again, ever. It's almost like it completely disappeared until Tina at the end asked, are you taking this with you? Well, I just, the fact that gloves were mentioned, I wonder whether he was doing something in the toilet, dismantling the bomb or wiping something down, or I just don't know. But it never comes up. But then people say, well, it was a grift, but she wasn't part of the grift. She was being grifted. That's the way I look at it. But she
I
very
think that's the right
specifically,
way to look at it.
yeah, she very specifically said that she saw him changing his shoes. Now that means that can only mean one thing, that he had shoes in the mystery bag, because they weren't in the suit, they weren't in the case. So that's possibly because everybody wants to know what's in that mystery bag, I think,
Oh, of
but
course.
and if he was wearing boots, what does that mean? That could, in theory, mean that he was a paratrooper,
Yeah, especially if
because
he's laced up some Cochranes after
yeah.
taking his dress shoes off.
But I mean, if someone wants to say to me, you know, the Kofelt grift was a complete and utter grift, where what Flo said she didn't even say, then that'd be great because obviously but as far as I'm aware, she was being grifted, but she would have told them they were going to make some kind of movie out of it. So she's obviously going to say to him, well, I saw him this and I did this and he did that. Why would she lie? So correct me if I'm wrong, people.
Tim, what is it about you and I and the other people in the vortex that were attracted to this? Why are we here? What is it about the people in the vortex? What do we all have in common? Because it's not obvious.
I don't know what attracts people to it, but this whole vortex, the fact that once you're in, you can't get out, is absolutely true.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I've tried 3 times. Um,
I've announced on this show that I was quitting a few
yeah,
times.
I've left. various groups. I actually think maybe after we speak, I might have a bit of a break because I'm thinking about I mean,
Liar.
well, I've got a book to write, although I'm not going to I'm thinking about not having a physical book. I'm thinking about doing an audio book. And I got some really good news today that I've got someone to speak it for me, to read it for me. So when people listen to it, they will hear his voice. Uh, Literally, the person who in the whole world I could choose has said he's going to do it for me. Yeah, the initial attraction, I can't really remember if I'm honest, because like I said to you earlier, it started when I saw a documentary when I was probably 15. Then I did my rock and roll thing, and then all of a sudden DB Cooper came into my life, and I can't actually quite remember. A lot of people say it was Larry, don't they? A lot of people say that it was Larry's kind of reopening of the case and involving citizens and things that brought them into it. That wasn't what did it for me, but the attraction. I don't know how to answer the attraction, but once you're in it, you're in it. Unless something really drastic happens, and then But there's a few people who've left recently. Some big names in the world have gone.
Yeah, but have they really left is the question. I mean, really I can only name one person
Mm.
that left and left it alone. And uh Sluggo, who rest in peace,
Oh,
Sluggo.
yeah.
He was heavily involved and then one day was just like, okay, I'm done. I'm done with all of this. Don't message me, don't talk to me. Bye.
Did he have a
And
in his break? Did he in his mind? Did he have a conclusion?
I don't believe so.
No.
I
Okay.
don't believe so. He was a guy who wanted a place where these are the facts that are presented. You
Mhm.
guys can debate nonsense over here.
Mhm.
These are the facts, and we're going to look at the facts and try and
Mhm.
figure it out from there. So he may have had a suspect or two that he was intrigued by, but he
Mhm.
wasn't the guy who was going to be like, I found this guy and it's him.
Mhm.
He was
Yeah.
more, tell me the facts about the case.
Mm. Yeah.
I
There's
mean, his
definitely two.
website was the tail number of the airplane.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was amazing timeline, which everybody still uses, don't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But there's definitely two different. There's two types of people in the case. In one respect, is there's some that need suspects and some that don't. Unfortunately, I need a suspect. I just need something to latch onto. I love the story and I love all the little trivial bits. I look at things like the drink. Why did he spill the drink? Or did he spill the drink on purpose? You know, all the little tiny trivial things is what interests me and also his mental state. But I need a suspect for all my sins. I need a suspect to latch onto to take me through that journey. And yeah, I kind of wish I was more like certain people within the vortex who are they just don't have they don't have a suspect, they don't want a suspect, and it's just purely about trying to find Cooper without even thinking about it could be him or could be her, the one her. Um, you know, but I wish I was more like that. But it just helps me through. It helps me through the journey to almost have someone to guide me through it, if that makes any sense.
Ted Braden is DB Cooper. What percentage?
98.
98. That's pretty confident. I like that.
Only because I have two other suspects that are 1% each. Yeah, I'm gonna say 98.
Who are the two suspects that are one percenters?
Um, n no one that you've probably ever heard of. No, well, I know you have heard of one of them. One of which I kind of joke around with, but the more I look into him, things kind of tie up. But I'll keep them to myself for now. But I'm 98% sure it was Ted.
Tim, do you have anything you want to promote? Any projects, your brother-in-law's plumbing company or anything like that you want to shout out?
No, not really. No, I mean, I have got a Facebook page. If rather than promote it, if anybody's interested, then just get to me through. Everybody knows that someone that knows me that knows someone. So, but it's on Facebook. But I'm not a big promoter. I'm not, I don't. I'm not a big. I am toying with the idea of writing an audio book. It's probably, it's probably going to take me a couple of years. But I mean, yeah. But no, I'm not nothing really to promote. Just no, I think that's it.
Well, if someone wants to find you and tell you that you're all wrong or that you're 100% right, is there somewhere we can track you down?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. Yeah, like I said, I've got a DB Cooper related Facebook page. But my Facebook handle is Tim Star. So facebook.com, and I think you put a slash and then it's Tim Star 5150. So TIMSTAR 5150. You can get me through there.
All right. And I guess we'll have you on in a year or so when you're done with your audiobook and ready to promote that.
Yeah.
All
I
right,
just got my
Tim.
fingers
Well,
crossed it was Ted.
well, thank you so much for coming on, Tim. I really appreciate it.
Take care.
All right. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
You can find Tim on Facebook, facebook.com/TimStar5150. If you have questions, comments, theories, or you know who DB Cooper was, please hit us up. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email us, dbcooperpodcast@gmail.com. We've got links for it all in the show notes. Thank you to Tim Wallace for reaching out to me. Thank you to Russell Colbert for reaching around to me. Thank you to Darren Osadich for finishing out our show. I'm Darren Schaefer, and thank you for listening to the Cooper Vortex.
Here's a story we all know about a man many years ago. Hijacked a plane, so we were told. Then he jumped into the cold. Lights a bourbon and a cigarette. He's in the air, the stage is set. Polite and kind, the people say it's time to make his getaway. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. DB Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Rolled up in his coat built tight. He's got enough to change his life. Where he landed no one knows, but from his tale a legend grows. Was a cold, dark, rainy night. As he walked he saw light. Held his cash close to his side. Just needs to catch a ride. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. DB Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Down to the bone. Look for a place to use the phone. Little cafe outside of town. He walked in, he just sat down. Met a man with a cowboy hat who told a friend right where he's at. Into the night he disappeared, and from that night a legend reared. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. DB Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. 40 years, the secret's out. The story has been told. DB Cooper's done running now. He was 80